Robots and Empire by Isaac Asimov. Narrated by Pam Ward.
Chapter 13. The Telepathic Robot. 51. Mandamus was not aware of developments on Solaria when he returned some months later from an extended third trip to Earth. On his first trip, 6 years before, Amadero had managed with some difficulty to have him sent as an accredited emissary from Aurora to discuss some trifling matter of an overstepping into spacer territory by trader vessels. He had endured the ceremony and bureaucratic ennui, and it quickly became clear that as such an emissary his mobility was limited. That didn't matter, for he learned what he had come to learn. He had returned with the news. "I doubt, Dr. Amadero, that there will be any problem at all. There is no way, no possible way, in which the Earth officials can control either entry or exit. Every year many millions of spacers visit Earth from many dozens of worlds, and every year as many millions of visiting settlers leave for home again. Every settler seems to feel that life is not complete unless he or she periodically breathes the air of Earth and treads its crowded underground spaces. It's a search for roots, I imagine. They don't seem to feel the absolute nightmare that existence on Earth is." "I know about it, Mandamus," said Amadero wearily. "Only intellectually, sir. You can't truly understand it until you experience it. Once you do, you'll find that none of your knowing will prepare you in the least for the reality. Why anyone should want to go back once gone." "Our ancestors certainly didn't want to go back once they had left the planet." "No," said Mandamus. "But interstellar flight was not then as advanced as it is now. It used to take months then, and the hyperspatial jump was a tricky thing. Now it takes merely days, and the jumps are routine and never go wrong. If it were as easy to return to Earth in our ancestors' time as it is now, I wonder if we would have broken away as we did." "Let's not philosophize, Mandamus. Proceed to the point." "Certainly. In addition to the coming and going of endless streams of settlers, millions of Earthmen each year head out as emigrants to one or another of the settler worlds. Some return almost at once, having failed to adapt. Others make new homes, but come back particularly frequently to visit. There's no way of keeping track of exits and entrances, and Earth doesn't even try. To attempt to set up systematic methods for identifying and keeping track of visitors might stem the flow, and Earth is very aware that each visitor brings money with him. The tourist trade, if we want to call it that, is currently Earth's most profitable industry." "You are saying, I suppose, that we can get the humanoid robots into Earth without trouble?" "With no trouble at all. There's no question in my mind as to that. Now that we have them properly programmed, we can send them to Earth in half a dozen batches with forged papers. We can't do anything about their robotic respect and awe of human beings, but that may not give them away. It will be interpreted as the usual settler respect and awe for the ancestral planet, but then I strongly suspect we don't have to drop them into one of the city airports. The vast spaces between cities are virtually untenanted, except by primitive work robots, and the incoming ships would go unnoticed, or at least disregarded." "Too risky, I think," said Amadero. 51A. 2 batches of humanoid robots were sent to Earth, and these mingled with the Earth people of the city before finding their way outward into the blank areas between and communicating with Aurora on shielded hyperbeam. Mandamus said he had thought about it deeply and had hesitated long. "I will have to go again, sir. I can't be positive they found the right spot." "Are you sure you know the right spot, Mandamus?" asked Amadero sardonically. "I have delved into Earth's ancient history thoroughly, sir. I know I can find it." "I don't think I can persuade the Council to send a warship with you." "No, I wouldn't want that. It would be worse than useless. I want a one-person vessel, with just enough power to get there and back." And in that way Mandamus made his second visit to Earth, dropping down into a region outside one of the smaller cities. With mingled relief and satisfaction, he found several of the robots in the right place, and remained with them to view their work, to give a few orders in connection with that work, and to make some fine adjustments in their programming. And then, under the uninterested glance of a few primitive Earth-formed agricultural robots, Mandamus made for the nearby city. It was a calculated risk, and Mandamus, no fearless hero, could feel his heart thudding uncomfortably within his chest. but it went well. There was some surprise shown by the gate warden when a human being presented himself at the gate, showing all signs of having spent a considerable time in the open. Mandamus had papers identifying him as a settler, however, and the warden shrugged. Settlers didn't mind the open, and it was far from unheard of for them to take small excursions through the fields and woods that lay about the unimpressive upper layers of a city that jutted above the ground. The warden gave but a cursory glance at his papers, and no one else asked for them at all. Mandamus's off-earth accent, as weakly Auroran as he could make it, was accepted without comment, and as nearly as he could tell, no one wondered whether he might be a spacer. But then why should they? The days when the spacers held a permanent outpost on Earth were 2 centuries in the past, and official emissaries from the spacer worlds were few, and of late growing steadily fewer. The provincial Earth people might not even remember that spacers existed. Mandamus was a little concerned that the thin, transparent gloves he always wore might be noted, or that his nose plugs would be remarked upon, but neither event took place. No restrictions were placed on his travels around the city or to other cities. He had enough money for that, and money spoke loudly on Earth, and, to tell the truth, even on spacer worlds. He grew accustomed to having no robot dog his heels, and when he met with some of Aurora's own humanoid robots in this city or that, he had to explain to them quite firmly that they must not dog his heels. He listened to their reports, gave them any instructions they seemed to require, and made arrangements for further robot shipments out of city. Eventually he found his way back to his ship and left. He was not challenged on his way out any more than he had been on his way in. Actually, he said thoughtfully to Amadero, these Earth people are not really barbarians. Aren't they, though? In their own world they behave in quite a human fashion. In fact, there is something winning in their friendliness. Are you beginning to regret the task you're engaged in? It does give me a grisly feeling as I wander among them, thinking that they don't know what is going to happen to them. I can't make myself enjoy what I'm doing. Of course you can, Mandamus. Think of the fact that once the job is done, you will be sure of a post as the head of the Institute before very much time has elapsed. That will sweeten the job for you. And Amadero kept a close eye on Mandamus thereafter. 51b. On Mandamus's 3rd trip, much of his earlier uneasiness had worn off, and he could carry himself almost as though he were an Earthman. The project was proceeding slowly, but dead center along the projected line of progress. He had experienced no health problems on his earlier visits, but on this 3rd one, no doubt due to his overconfidence, he must have exposed himself to something or other. At least for a time he had an alarming drippiness of the nose, accompanied by a cough. A visit to one of the city dispensaries resulted in a gamma-globulin injection that relieved the condition at once, but he found the dispensary more frightening than the illness. Everyone there, he knew, was likely to be ill with something contagious or to be in close contact with those who were ill. But now, at last, he was back in the quiet orderliness of Aurora, and incredibly thankful to be so. He was listening to Amadero's account of the Solarian crisis. "Have you heard nothing of it at all?" demanded Amadero. Mandamus shook his head. "Nothing, sir. Earth is an incredibly provincial world. 800 cities with a total of 8 billion people, all interested in nothing but the 800 cities with a total of 8 billion people. You would think that settlers existed only to visit Earth, and that spacers did not exist at all. Indeed, the news reports in any one city deal about 90% of the time with that city alone. Earth is an enclosed, claustrophilic world, mentally as well as physically. And yet you say they are not barbarian." "Claustrophilia isn't necessarily barbarism. In their own terms, they are civilized." "In their own terms. But never mind. The problem at the moment is Solaria. Not one of the spacer worlds will move. The principle of non-interference is paramount, and they insist that Solaria's internal problems are for Solaria alone. Our own chairman is as inert as any other, even though Fastolf is dead, and his palsied hand no longer rests on us all. I can do nothing by myself until such time as I am chairman." Mandamus said, "How can they suppose Solaria to have internal problems that may not be interfered with when the Solarians are gone?" Amadero said sardonically, "How is it you see the folly of it at once and they don't?" They say there is no hard evidence that the Solarians are totally gone, and as long as they, or even some of them, might be on the world, there is no right for any other space or world to intrude uninvited. How do they explain the absence of radiational activity? They say that the Solarians may have moved underground, or that they may have developed a technological advance of some sort that obviates radiation leakage. They also say that the Solarians were not seen to leave, and that they have absolutely nowhere to go. Of course they were not seen leaving, because no one was watching. Mandamus said, "How do they argue that the Solarians have nowhere to go to? There are many empty worlds." The argument is that the Solarians cannot live without their incredible crowds of robots, and they can't take those robots with them. If they came here, for instance, how many robots do you suppose we could allot to them, if any? And what is your argument against that? I haven't any. Still, whether they are gone or not, the situation is strange and puzzling, and it is incredible that no one will move to investigate it. I've warned everyone, just as strenuously as I can, that inertia and apathy will be the end of us, that as soon as the settler worlds become aware of the fact that Solaria was, or might be, empty, they would have no hesitation in investigating the matter. Those swarmers have a mindless curiosity that I wish we had some share in. They will, without thinking twice, risk their lives if some profit lures them on. What profit in this case, Dr. Amadero? If the Solarians are gone, they have, perforce, left almost all their robots behind. They are, or were, particularly ingenious roboticists, and the settlers, for all their hatred of robots, will not hesitate to appropriate them and ship them to us for good space credits. In fact, they have announced this. 2 settler ships have already landed on Solaria. We have sent a protest over this, but they will surely disregard the protest. And just as surely we will do nothing further. Quite the contrary. Some of the spacer worlds are sending out quiet queries as to the nature of the robots that might be salvaged and what their prices would be. Perhaps just as well, said Mandamus quietly. Just as well that we're behaving exactly as the settler propagandists say we will? That we act as though we are degenerating and turning into soft pulps of decadence? Why repeat their buzzwords, sir? The fact is that we are quiet and civilized, and have not yet been touched where it hurts. If we were, we would fight back strongly enough, and I'm sure smash them. We still far outstrip them technologically. But the damage to ourselves will not be exactly pleasurable. Which means that we must not be too ready to go to war. If Solaria is deserted, and the settlers wish to plunder it, perhaps we ought to let them. After all, I predict that we will be all set to make our move within months. A rather hungry and ferocious look came over Amadero's face. Months? I'm sure of it. So the first thing we must do is to avoid being provoked. We will ruin everything if we move toward a conflict there is no need to fight and undergo damage, even if we win, that we don't need to suffer. After all, in a little while we are going to win totally, without fighting and without damage. Poor Earth. If you're going to be sorry for them, said Amadero with furious lightness, perhaps you'll do nothing to them. On the contrary, said Mandamus coolly, it's precisely because I fully intend to do something to them, and know that it will be done, that I am sorry for them. You will be chairman. And you will be head of the Institute. A small post in comparison to yours. And after I die, said Amadero in half a snarl. I do not look that far ahead. I am quite, began Amadero, but was interrupted by the steady buzz of the message unit. Without looking, and quite automatically, Amadero placed his hand at the exit slot. He looked at the thin strip of paper that emerged, and a slow smile appeared on his lips. The 2 settler ships that landed on Solaria? He said. Yes, sir, asked Mandamus, frowning. Destroyed. Both destroyed. How? In an explosive blaze of radiation, easily detected from space. You see what it means? The Solarians have not left after all, and the weakest of our worlds can easily handle settler ships. It is a bloody nose for the settlers, and not something they'll forget. Here, Mandamus, read for yourself. Mandamus pushed the paper aside. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Solarians are still on the planet. They may merely have booby-trapped it somehow. What is the difference? Personal attack or booby-trap, the ships were destroyed. This time they were caught by surprise. What about next time, when they are prepared? And what if they consider the event a deliberate spacer attack? We will reply that the Solarians were merely defending themselves against a deliberate settler invasion. But, sir, are you suggesting a battle of words? What if the settlers don't bother talking, but consider the destruction of their ships an act of war and retaliate at once? Why should they? Because they are as insane as we can be once pride is hurt, more so since they have a greater background of violence. They will be beaten. You yourself admit they will inflict unacceptable damage upon us, even if they are beaten. What would you have me do? Aurora did not destroy those ships. Persuade the chairman to make it quite plain that Aurora had nothing to do with it, that none of the spacer worlds had anything to do with it, that the blame for the action rests on Solaria alone. And abandon Solaria? That would be a cowardly act. Mandamus blazed into excitement. Dr. Amadero, have you never heard of anything called a strategic retreat? Persuade the spacer worlds to back off, for only a little while, on some plausible pretext. It is only a matter of some months till our plan on Earth comes to fruition. It may be hard for everyone else to back off and be apologetic to the spacers, for they don't know what is coming. But we do. In fact, you and I, with our special knowledge, can look upon this event as a gift from what used to be called the gods. Let the settlers remain preoccupied with Solaria, while their destruction is prepared, all unobserved by them, on Earth. Or would you prefer us to be ruined on the very brink of final victory? Amadero found himself flinching before the direct glare of the other's deep-set eyes. 52. Amadero had never had a worse time than during the period following the destruction of the settler ships. The chairman, fortunately, could be persuaded to follow a policy of what Amadero termed masterful yielding. The phrase caught the chairman's imagination, even though it was an oxymoron. Besides, the chairman was good at masterful yielding. The rest of the council was harder to handle. The exasperated Amadero exhausted himself in picturing the horrors of war and the necessity of choosing the proper moment to strike, and not the improper one, if war there must be. He invented novel plausibilities for why the moment was not yet, and used them in discussions with the leaders of the other spacer worlds. Aurora's natural hegemony had to be exercised to the utmost to get them to yield. But when Captain D.G. Bailey arrived with his ship and his demand, Amadero felt he could do no more. It was too much. "It is altogether impossible," said Amadero. "Are we to allow him to land on Aurora with his beard, his ridiculous clothing, his incomprehensible accent? Am I expected to ask the council to agree to hand over a spacer woman to him? It would be an act absolutely unprecedented in our history. A spacer woman!" Mandamus said dryly, "You have always referred to that particular spacer woman as the Solarian woman." "She is the Solarian woman to us, but she will be considered a spacer woman once a settler is involved. If his ship lands on Solaria, as he suggests it will, it may be destroyed as the others were, together with him and the woman. I may then be accused by my enemies, with some color of justification, of murder, and my political career may not survive that." Mandamus said, "Think, instead, of the fact that we have labored nearly 7 years in order to arrange the final destruction of Earth, and that we are now only a few months from the completion of the project. Shall we risk war now, and, at a stroke, ruin everything we've done, when we are so close to final victory?" Amadero shook his head. "It isn't as though I have a choice in the matter, my friend. The council wouldn't follow me if I tried to argue them into surrendering the woman to a settler. And the mere fact that I have suggested it will be used against me. My political career will be shaken, and we may then have a war in addition. Besides, the thought of a spacer woman dying in service to a settler is unbearable." "One would suppose you were fond of the Solarian woman." "You know I am not. With all my heart I wish she had died 20 decades ago, but not this way, not on a settler ship. But I should remember that she is an ancestress of yours in the 5th generation. Mandamus looked a bit more dour than he usually did. "Of what consequence is that to me? I am a spacer individual, conscious of myself and of my society. I am not an ancestor-worshipping member of a tribal conglomerate." For a moment Mandamus fell silent, and his thin face took on a look of intense concentration. "Dr. Amadero," he said, "could you not explain to the council that this ancestress of mine is being taken not as a spacer hostage, but only because her unique knowledge of Solaria, where she spent her childhood and youth, could make her an essential part of the exploration, and that this exploration might even be helpful to us as well as to the settlers. After all, in truth, wouldn't it be desirable for us to know what those miserable Solarians are up to? The woman will presumably bring back a report of the events, if she survives. Amadero thrust out his lower lip. That might work if the woman went on board voluntarily, if she made it clear that she understood the importance of the work and wished to perform her patriotic duty. To put her on board ship by force, though, is unthinkable. Well, then, suppose I were to see this ancestress of mine, and try to persuade her to get on the ship willingly, and suppose also that you speak to this settler captain by hyperwave, and tell him he can land on Aurora, and have the woman, if he can persuade her to go with him willingly, or at least say that she'll go with him willingly, whether she does or not. I suppose we can't lose by making the effort, but I don't see how we can win. Yet to Amadero's surprise they did win. He had listened with astonishment as Mandamus told him the details. I brought up the matter of the humanoid robots, Mandamus said, and it's clear she knew nothing about them, from which I deduced Fastolf had known nothing about them. It has been one of those things that nagged at me. Then I talked a great deal about my ancestry, in such a way as to force her to talk of that Earthman, Elijah Bailey. What about him? Said Amadero harshly. Nothing, except that she talked about him and remembered. This settler who wants her is a descendant of Bailey, and I thought it might influence her to consider the settler's request more favorably than she might otherwise have done. In any case, it had worked, and for a few days Amadero felt a relief from the almost continuous pressure that had plagued him from the start of the Solarian crisis. But only for a very few days. 53. One point that worked to Amadero's advantage at this time was that he had not seen Vasilia thus far during the Solarian crisis. It would certainly not have been an appropriate time to see her. He did not wish to be annoyed by her petty concern over a robot she claimed as her own, with total disregard for the legalities of the situation, at a time when a true crisis exercised his every nerve and thought. Nor did he wish to expose himself to the kind of quarrel that might easily arise between her and Mandamus, over the question of which was eventually to preside over the Robotics Institute. In any case, he had about come to the decision that Mandamus ought to be his successor. Throughout the Solarian crisis, he had kept his eye fixed on what was important. Even when Amadero himself had felt shaken, Mandamus had remained icily calm. It was Mandamus who thought it conceivable that the Solarian woman might accompany the settler captain voluntarily, and it was he who maneuvered her into doing so. And if his plan for the destruction of Earth worked itself out as it should, as it must, then Amadero could see Mandamus succeeding as council chairman eventually. It would even be just, thought Amadero, in a rare burst of selflessness. On this particular evening, in consequence, he did not so much as expend a thought upon Vasilia. He left the Institute with a small squad of robots seeing him safely to his ground car. That ground car, driven by one robot, and with two more in the back seat with him, passed quietly through a twilit and chilly rain and brought him to his establishment, where two more robots ushered him indoors. And all this time he did not think of Vasilia. To find her sitting in his living room, then, in front of his hyperwave set, watching an intricate robot ballet, with several of Amadero's robots in their niches, and two of her own robots behind her chair, struck him at first not so much with the anger of violated privacy, as with pure surprise. It took some time for him to control his breathing well enough to be able to speak, and then his anger arose, and he said harshly, "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" Vasilia was calm enough. Amadero's appearance was, after all, entirely expected. "What I'm doing here," she said, "is waiting to see you. Getting in was not difficult. Your robots know my appearance very well, and they know my standing at the Institute. Why shouldn't they allow me to enter if I assure them I have an appointment with you?" "Which you haven't. You have violated my privacy." "Not really. There's a limit to how much trust you can squeeze out of someone else's robots. Look at them. They have never once taken their eyes from me. If I had wanted to disturb your belongings, look through your papers, take advantage of your absence in any way, I assure you, I could not have. My 2 robots are no match against them. "Do you know," said Amadero bitterly, "that you have acted in a thoroughly unspacer fashion? You are despicable, and I will not forget this." Vasilia seemed to blanch slightly at the adjectives. She said in a low, hard voice, "I hope you don't forget it, Keldon, for I've done what I've done for you, and if I reacted as I should to your foul mouth, I would leave now and let you continue for the rest of your life to be the defeated man you have been for the past 20 decades. I will not remain a defeated man, whatever you do." Vasilia said, "You sound as though you believe that, but you see you do not know what I know. I must tell you that without my intervention you will remain defeated. I don't care what scheme you have in mind. I don't care what this thin-lipped, acid-faced Mandamus has cooked up for you." "Why do you mention him?" said Amadero quickly. "Because I wish to," said Vasilia with a touch of contempt. "Whatever he has done, or thinks he is doing, and don't be frightened, for I haven't any idea what that might be, it won't work. I may not know anything else about it, but I do know it won't work." "You're babbling idiocies," said Amadero. "You had better listen to these idiocies, Keldon, if you don't want everything to fall into ruin. Not just you, but possibly the spacer worlds, one and all. Still, you may not want to listen to me. It's your choice. Which, then, is it to be?" "Why should I listen to you? What possible reason is there for me to listen to you?" "For one thing, I told you the Solarians were preparing to leave their world. If you had listened to me then, you would not have been caught so by surprise when they did." "The Solarian crisis will yet turn to our advantage." "No, it will not," said Vasilia. "You may think it will, but it won't. It will destroy you, no matter what you are doing to meet the emergency, unless you are willing to let me have my say." Amadero's lips were white and were trembling slightly. The 2 centuries of defeat Vasilia had mentioned had had a lasting effect upon him, and the Solarian crisis had not helped, so he lacked the inner strength to order his robots to see her out, as he should have. He said sullenly, "Well, then, put it in brief." "You would not believe what I have to say if I did, so let me do it my own way. You can stop me at any time, but then you will destroy the spacer worlds. Of course they will last my time, and it won't be I who will go down in history, settler history, by the way, as the greatest failure on record. Shall I speak?" Amadero folded into a chair. "Speak, then, and when you are through, leave." "I intend to, Keldon, unless, of course, you ask me, very politely, to stay and help you. Shall I start?" Amadero said nothing, and Vasilia began. "I told you that during my stay on Solaria I became aware of some very peculiar positronic pathway patterns they had designed, pathways that struck me very forcefully as representing attempts at producing telepathic robots. Now, why should I have thought that?" Amadero said bitterly, "I cannot tell what pathological drives may power your thinking." Vasilia brushed that aside with a grimace. "Thank you, Keldon. I've spent some months thinking about that, since I was acute enough to think the matter involved not pathology, but some subliminal memory. My mind went back to my childhood, when Fastolf, whom I then considered my father, in one of his generous moods — he would experiment now and then with generous moods, you understand — gave me a robot of my own." "Giskard again?" muttered Amadero with impatience. "Yes, Giskard. Giskard, always. I was in my teenage years, and I already had the instinct of a roboticist. Or, I should say, I was born with the instinct. I had as yet very little mathematics, but I had a grasp of patterns. With the passing of scores of decades, my knowledge of mathematics steadily improved, but I don't think I have advanced very far in my feeling for patterns. My father would say, 'Little Vass.' He also experimented in loving diminutives to see how that would affect me. 'You have a genius for patterns.' I think I did." Amadero said, "Spare me. I'll concede your genius. Meanwhile, I have not yet had my dinner. Do you know that?" "Well," said Vasilia sharply, "order your dinner and invite me to join you." Amadero, frowning, raised his arm perfunctorily and made a quick sign. The quick motion of robots at work made itself evident at once. Vasilia said, I would play with pathway patterns for Giskard. I would come to Fastolf, my father as I then thought of him, and I would show him a pattern. He might shake his head and laugh and say, "If you add that to poor Giskard's brain, he will no longer be able to talk, and he will be in a great deal of pain." I remember asking if Giskard could really feel pain, and my father said, "We don't know what he would feel, but he would act as we would act if we were in a great deal of pain, so we might as well say he would feel pain." Or else I would take one of my patterns to him, and he would smile indulgently and say, "Well, that won't hurt him, little Vass, and it might be interesting to try." And I would. Sometimes I would take it out again, and sometimes I would leave it. I was not simply fiddling with Giskard for the sadistic joy of it, as I imagine I might have been tempted to do if I were someone other than myself. The fact is, I was very fond of Giskard, and I had no desire to harm him. When it seemed to me that one of my improvements, I always thought of them as improvements, made Giskard speak more freely, or react more quickly, or more interestingly, and seemed to do no harm, I would let it stay. And then, one day, a robot standing at Amadero's elbow would not have dared to interrupt a guest unless a true emergency existed, but Amadero had no difficulty in understanding the significance of the waiting. He said, "Is dinner ready?" "Yes, sir," said the robot. Amadero gestured rather impatiently in Vasilia's direction. "You are invited to have dinner with me." They walked into Amadero's dining room, which Vasilia had never entered before. Amadero was, after all, a private person, and was notorious for his neglect of the social amenities. He had been told more than once that he would succeed better in politics if he entertained in his home, and he had always smiled politely and said, "Too high a price." It was perhaps because of his failure to entertain, thought Vasilia, that there was no sign of originality or creativity in the furnishings. Nothing could be plainer than the table, the dishes, and the cutlery. As for the walls, they were merely flat-colored vertical planes. Put together, it rather dampened one's appetite, she thought. The soup they began with, a clear bouillon, was as plain as the furniture, and Vasilia began to dispose of it without enthusiasm. Amadero said, "My dear Vasilia, you see I am being patient. I have no objection to having you write your autobiography, if you wish, but is it really your plan to recite several chapters of it to me? If it is, I must tell you bluntly that I'm not really interested." Vasilia said, "You will become extremely interested in just a little while. Still, if you're really enamored of failure and want to continue to achieve nothing you wish to achieve, simply say so. I will then eat in silence and leave. Is that what you wish?" Amadero sighed. "Well, go on, Vasilia." Vasilia said, "And then one day I came up with a pattern more elaborate, more pleasant, and more enticing than I had ever seen before, or, in all truth, than I have ever seen since. I would have loved to show it to my father, but he was away at some meeting or other on one of the other worlds. I didn't know when he'd be back, and I put aside my pattern, but each day I would look at it with more interest and more fascination. Finally, I could wait no longer. I simply could not. It seemed so beautiful that I thought it ludicrous to suppose it could do harm. I was only an infant in my second decade, and had not yet completely outgrown irresponsibility, so I modified Giskard's brain by incorporating the pattern into it. And it did no harm. That was immediately obvious. He responded to me with perfect ease, and, it seemed to me, was far quicker in understanding and much more intelligent than he had been. I found him far more fascinating and lovable than before. I was delighted, and yet I was nervous, too. What I had done, modifying Giskard without clearing it with Fastolf, was strictly against the rules Fastolf had set for me, and I knew that well. Yet clearly I was not going to undo what I had done. When I had modified Giskard's brain, I excused it to myself by saying that it would only be for a little while, and that I would then neutralize the modification. Once the modification had been made, however, it became quite clear to me that I would not neutralize it. I was simply not going to do that. In fact, I never modified Giskard again for fear of disturbing what I had just done. Nor did I ever tell Fastolf what I had done. I destroyed all record of the marvelous pattern I had devised, and Fastolf never found out that Giskard had been modified without his knowledge. Never. And then we went our separate ways, Fastolf and I, and Fastolf would not give up Giskard. I screamed that he was mine and that I loved him. But Fastolf's kindly benevolence, of which he made such a parade all his life, that business of loving all things, great and small, was never allowed to stand in the way of his own desires. I received other robots I cared nothing for, but he kept Giskard for himself. And when he died, he left Giskard to the Solarian woman, a last bitter slap at me. Amadero had only managed to get halfway through the salmon mousse. If all this is intended to advance your case of having Giskard's ownership transferred from the Solarian woman to yourself, it won't help. I have already explained to you why I cannot set aside Fastolf's will. There's something more to it than that, Keldon, said Basilia. A great deal more, infinitely more. Do you want me to stop now?
Amadero stretched his lips into a rueful grin. Having listened to so much of this, I will play the madman and listen to more. You would play the madman if you did not, for I now come to the point. I have never stopped thinking of Giskard, and of the cruelty and injustice of my having been deprived of him, but somehow I never thought of that pattern with which I had modified him with no one's knowledge but my own. I am quite certain I could not have reproduced that pattern if I had tried, and from what I can now remember it was like nothing else I have ever seen in robotics, until I saw, briefly, something like that pattern during my stay on Solaria. The Solarian pattern seemed familiar to me, but I didn't know why. It took some weeks of intense thought before I dredged out of some well-hidden part of my unconscious mind the slippery thought of that pattern I had dreamed out of nothing 25 decades ago. Even though I can't remember my pattern exactly, I know that the Solarian pattern was a whiff of it, and no more. It was just the barest suggestion of something I had captured in miraculously complex symmetry. But I looked at the Solarian pattern with the experience I had gained in 25 decades of deep immersion in robotics theory, and it suggested telepathy to me. If that simple, scarcely interesting pattern suggested it, what must my original have meant? The thing I invented as a child and have never recaptured since. Amadero said, "You keep saying that you're coming to the point, Basilia. Would I be completely unreasonable if I asked you to stop moaning and reminiscing and simply set out that point in a simple declarative sentence?" Basilia said, "Gladly. What I am telling you, Keldon, is that without my ever knowing it, I converted Giskard into a telepathic robot, and that he has been one ever since." 54. Amadero looked at Basilia for a long time, and, because the story seemed to have come to an end, he returned to the salmon mousse and ate some of it thoughtfully. He then said, "Impossible. Do you take me for an idiot?" "I take you for a failure," said Basilia. "I don't say Giskard can read conversations in minds, that he can transmit and receive words or ideas. Perhaps that is impossible, even in theory. But I am quite certain he can detect emotions and the general set of mental activity, and perhaps even modify it." Amadero shook his head violently. "Impossible." "Impossible? Think a while. 20 decades ago you had almost achieved your aims. Fastolf was at your mercy. Chairman Horder was your ally. What happened? Why did everything go wrong?" "The Earthman," Amadero began, choking at the memory. "The Earthman," Basilia mimicked. "The Earthman, or was it the Solarian woman?" "It was neither. Neither. It was Giskard, who was there all the time, sensing, adjusting." "Why should he be interested? He is a robot." "A robot loyal to his master, to Fastolf. By the first law he had to see to it that Fastolf came to no harm, and being telepathic he could not interpret that as signifying physical harm only. He knew that if Fastolf could not have his way, could not encourage the settlement of the habitable worlds of the galaxy, he would undergo profound disappointment, and that would be harm in Giskard's telepathic universe. He could not let that happen, and he intervened to keep it from happening." "No, no, no," said Amadero in disgust. "You want that to be so, out of some wild romantic longing, but that doesn't make it so. I remember too well what happened. It was the Earthman. It needs no telepathic robot to explain the events." "And what has happened since, Keldon?" demanded Basilia. In 20 decades, have you ever managed to win out over Fastolf? With all the facts in your favor, with the obvious bankruptcy of Fastolf's policy, have you ever been able to dispose of a majority in the council? Have you ever been able to sway the chairman to the point where you could possess real power? How do you explain that, Keldon? In all those 20 decades, the Earthman has not been on Aurora. He has been dead for over 16 decades, his miserably short life running out in 8 decades or so. Yet you continue to fail. You have an unbroken record of failure. Even now that Fastolf is dead, have you managed to profit completely from the broken pieces of his coalition, or do you find that success still seems to elude you? What is it that remains? The Earthman is gone. Fastolf is gone. It is Giskard who has worked against you all this time, and Giskard remains. He is as loyal now to the Solarian woman as he was to Fastolf, and the Solarian woman has no cause to love you, I think. Amadero's face twisted into a mask of anger and frustration. It's not so. None of this is so. You're imagining things. Vasilia remained quite cool. No, I'm not. I'm explaining things. I've explained things you haven't been able to explain. Or have you an alternate explanation? And I can give you the cure. Transfer ownership of Giskard from the Solarian woman to me, and quite suddenly events will begin to twist themselves to your benefit. No, said Amadero. They are moving to my benefit already. You may think so, but they won't, as long as Giskard is working against you. No matter how close you come to winning, no matter how sure of victory you become, it will all melt away as long as you don't have Giskard on your side. That happened 20 decades ago. It will happen now. Amadero's face suddenly cleared. He said, Well, come to think of it, though I don't have Giskard, and neither do you, it doesn't matter, for I can show you that Giskard is not telepathic. If Giskard were telepathic, as you say, if he had the ability to order affairs to his own liking, or to the liking of the human being who is his owner, then why would he have allowed the Solarian woman to be taken to what will probably be her death? Her death? What are you talking about, Keldon? Are you aware, Vasilia, that 2 settler ships have been destroyed on Solaria? Or have you been doing nothing lately but dreaming of patterns and of the brave days of childhood when you were modifying your pet robot? Sarcasm doesn't become you, Keldon. I have heard about the settler ships on the news. What of them? A 3rd settler ship is going out to investigate. It may be destroyed, too. Possibly. On the other hand, it would take precautions. It did. It demanded and received the Solarian woman, feeling that she knows the planet well enough to enable them to avoid destruction. Vasilia said, That's scarcely likely, since she hasn't been there in 20 decades. Right. The chances are, then, that she'll die with them. It would mean nothing to me personally. I would be delighted to have her dead, and I think so would you. And putting that to one side, it would give us good grounds for complaint to the settler worlds, and it would make it difficult for them to argue that the destruction of the ships is a deliberate action on the part of Aurora. Would we destroy one of our own? Now the question is, Vasilia, why would Giskard, if he had the powers you claim he has, and the loyalties, allow the Solarian woman to volunteer to be taken to what is very likely to be her death? Vasilia was taken aback. Did she go of her own free will? Absolutely. She was perfectly willing. It would have been politically impossible to force her to do so against her will. But I don't understand. There is nothing to understand, except that Giskard is merely a robot. For a moment, Vasilia froze in her seat, one hand to her chin. Then she said slowly, They don't allow robots on settler worlds or on settler ships. That means she went alone, without robots. Well, no, of course not. They had to accept personal robots if they expected to get her willingly. They took along that man-mimic robot, Daneel, and the other was... He paused and brought out the word with a hiss. Giskard. Who else? So this miracle robot of your fantasy goes to his destruction as well. He could no more... His voice faded away. Vasilia was on her feet, eyes blazing, face suffused with color. You mean Giskard went? He's off this world and on a settler ship? Keldon, you may have ruined us all. 55. Neither finished the meal. Vasilia walked hastily out of the dining room and disappeared into the personal. Amadero, struggling to remain coldly logical, shouted to her through the closed door, perfectly aware that it damaged his dignity to do so. He called out, "It's all the stronger an indication that Giskard is no more than a robot. Why should he be willing to go to Solaria to face destruction with his owner?" Eventually the sound of running water and splashing ceased, and Vasilia emerged with her face freshly washed and almost frozen in its grip on calmness. She said, "You really don't understand, do you? You amaze me, Keldon. Think it through. Giskard can never be in danger as long as he can influence human minds, can he? Nor can the Solarian woman, as long as Giskard devotes himself to her. The settler who carried off the Solarian woman must have found out, on interviewing her, that she had not been on Solaria in 20 decades, so he can't really have continued to believe after that she could do him much good. With her he took Giskard, but he didn't know that Giskard could do him good either. Or could he have known that?" She thought a while and then said slowly, "No, there is no way he could have known it. If, in more than 20 decades, no one has penetrated the fact that Giskard has mental abilities, then Giskard is clearly interested in having no one guess it. And if that is so, then no one can possibly have guessed it." Amadero said spitefully, "You claim to have worked it out." Vasilia said, "I had special knowledge, Keldon, and even so it was not till now that I saw the obvious, and then only because of the hint on Solaria. Giskard must have darkened my mind in that respect, too, or I would have seen it long ago. I wonder if Vastov knew." "How much easier," said Amadero restlessly, "to accept the simple fact that Giskard is simply a robot." "You will walk the easy road to ruin, Keldon, but I don't think I will let you do that, no matter how much you want to. What it amounts to is that the settler came for the Solarian woman and took her along, even though he discovered she would be of little, if any, use to him. And the Solarian woman volunteered to go, even though she must dread being on a settler's ship, along with diseased barbarians, and even though her destruction on Solaria must have seemed to her a very likely consequence. It seems to me, then, that this is all the work of Giskard, who forced the settler to continue to demand the Solarian woman against reason, and forced the Solarian woman to accede to the request against reason." Amadero said, "But why? May I ask that simple question? Why?" "I suppose, Keldon, that Giskard felt it was important to get away from Aurora. Could he have guessed that I was on the point of learning his secret? If so, he may well have been uncertain of his present ability to tamper with me. I am, after all, a skilled roboticist. Besides, he would remember that he was once mine, and a robot does not easily ignore the demands of loyalty. The only way, perhaps, that he felt he could keep the Solarian woman secure was to move himself away from my influence." She looked up at Amadero and said firmly, "Keldon, we must get him back. We can't let him work at promoting the settler cause in the safe haven of a settler world. He did enough damage right here among us. We must get him back, and you must make me his legal owner. I can handle him, I assure you, and make him work for us. Remember, I am the only one who can handle him." Amadero said, "I do not see any reason to worry. In the very likely case that he is a mere robot, he will be destroyed on Solaria, and we will be rid of both him and the Solarian woman. In the unlikely case that he is what you say he is, he won't be destroyed on Solaria, but then he will have to return to Aurora. After all, the Solarian woman, though she is not an Auroran by birth, has lived on Aurora far too long to be able to face life among the barbarians, and when she insists on returning to civilization, Giskard will have no alternative but to return with her." Vasilia said, "After all this, Keldon, you still don't understand Giskard's abilities. If he feels it important to remain away from Aurora, he can easily adjust the Solarian woman's emotions in such a way as to make her stand life on a settler world, just as he made her willing to board a settler ship. Well, then, if necessary, we can simply escort that settler ship, with the Solarian woman and with Giskard, back to Aurora. How do you propose to do that?" "It can be done. We are not fools here on Aurora, for all that it seems clearly your opinion that you yourself are the only rational person on the planet. The settler ship is going to Solaria to investigate the destruction of the earlier two ships. but I hope you don't think we intend to depend upon its good offices, or even upon those of the Solarian woman. We are sending 2 of our warships to Solaria, and we do not expect that they will have trouble. If there are Solarians still on the planet, they may be able to destroy primitive settler ships, but they won't be able to touch an Auroran vessel of war. If, then, the settler ship, through some magic on the part of Giskard— "Not magic," Basilia interrupted tartly. "Mental influence. If, then, the settler ship, for whatever reason, should be able to rise from the surface of Solaria, our ships will cut them off and politely ask for the delivery of the Solarian woman and her robots. Failing that, they will insist that the settler ship accompany our ship to Aurora. There will be no hostility about it. Our ship will merely be escorting an Auroran national to her home world. Once the Solarian woman and her 2 robots disembark on Aurora, the settler ship will then be able to proceed at will to its own destination." Basilia nodded warily at this. "It sounds good, Keldon, but do you know what I suspect will happen?" "What, Basilia?" "It is my opinion that the settler ship will rise from the surface of Solaria, but that our warships won't. Whatever is on Solaria can be countered by Giskard, but I fear by nothing else." "If that happens," said Amadiro with a grim smile, "then I'll admit there may be something after all to your fantasy. But it won't happen." 56. The next morning, Vasilia's chief personal robot, delicately designed to appear female, came to Vasilia's bedside. Vasilia stirred, and, without opening her eyes, said, "What is it, Nadila?" There was no need to open her eyes. In many decades no one had ever approached her bedside but Nadila. Nadila said softly, "Madam, you are desired at the Institute by Dr. Amadiro." Vasilia's eyes flew open. "What time is it?" "It is 05:17, madam." "Before sunrise?" Vasilia was indignant. "Yes, madam." "When does he want me?" "Now, madam." "Why?" "His robots have not informed us, madam, but they say it is important." Vasilia threw aside the bedsheets. "I will have breakfast first, Nadila, and a shower before that. Inform Amadiro's robots to take visitors' niches and wait. If they urge speed, remind them they are in my establishment." Vasilia, annoyed, did not hasten unduly. If anything, her toilette was more painstaking than usual, and her breakfast more leisurely. She was not ordinarily one to spend much time over either. The news, which she watched, gave no indication of anything that might explain Amadiro's call. By the time a ground car, containing herself and 4 robots, 2 of Amadiro's and 2 of her own, had brought her to the Institute, the sun was making its appearance over the horizon. Amadiro looked up and said, "You are finally here, then?" The walls of his office were still glowing, though their light was no longer needed. "I'm sorry," said Vasilia stiffly. "I quite realize that sunrise is a terribly late hour at which to begin work." "No games, Vasilia, please. Very soon I will have to be at the council chamber. The chairman has been up longer than I have. Vasilia, I apologize, quite humbly, for doubting you." "The settler ship has lifted off safely, then?" "Yes, and one of our ships has been destroyed, as you predicted. The fact has not been publicized yet, but the news will leak out eventually, of course." Vasilia's eyes widened. She had predicted this outcome with a bit more in the way of outward confidence than she had felt, but clearly this was not the time to say so. What she did say was, "Then you accept the fact that Giskard has extraordinary powers?" Cautiously, Amadiro said, "I don't consider the matter to be mathematically proven, but I'm willing to accept it pending further information. What I want to know is what we ought to do next. The Council knows nothing of Giskard, and I do not propose to tell them." "I'm glad your thinking is clear to that extent, Keldon." "But you're the one who understands Giskard, and you can best tell what ought to be done. What do I tell the Council, then, and how do I explain the action without giving away the whole truth?" "It depends. Now that the settler ship has left Solaria, where is it going? Can we tell? After all, if it is returning now to Aurora, we need do nothing but prepare for its arrival." "It is not coming to Aurora," said Amadiro emphatically. "You were right there, too, it seems. Giskard, assuming he is running the show, seems determined to stay away. We have intercepted the ship's messages to its own world, encoded, of course, but there isn't a settler code we haven't broken. I suspect they've broken ours, too. I wonder why everyone won't agree to send messages in the clear and save a lot of trouble. Amadero shrugged it away. Never mind that. The point is that the settler ship is going back to its own planet. With the Solarian woman and the robot? Of course. You're sure of that? They haven't been left on Solaria? We're sure of that, said Amadero impatiently. Apparently the Solarian woman was responsible for their getting off the surface. She? In what way? We don't yet know, Basilia said. It had to be Giskard. He made it appear to be the Solarian woman. And what do we do now? We must get Giskard back. Yes, but I can't very well persuade the Council to risk an interstellar crisis over the return of a robot. You don't, Keldon. You ask for the return of the Solarian woman, something we certainly have a right to request. And do you think for one moment she would return without her robots? Or that Giskard will allow the Solarian woman to return without him? Or that the settler world would want to keep the robots if the Solarian woman returns? Ask for her, firmly. She's an Auroran citizen lent out for a job on Solaria, which is done, and she must now be returned forthwith. Make it belligerent, as though it were a threat of war. We can't risk war, Basilia. You won't risk it. Giskard can't take an action that might lead directly to war. If the settler leaders resist and become belligerent in their return, Giskard will perforce make the necessary modifications in the attitude of the settler leaders so as to have the Solarian woman return peaceably to Aurora. And he himself will, of course, have to return with her. Amadero said drearily, And once he's back, he will alter us, I suppose, and we will forget his powers and disregard him, and he will still be able to follow his own plan, whatever it is. Basilia leaned back her head and laughed. Not a chance. I know Giskard, you see, and I can handle him. Just bring him back and persuade the Council to disregard Fastall Swill. It can be done, and you can do it. And to assign Giskard to me. He will then be working for us. Aurora will rule the galaxy. You will spend the remaining decades of your life as chairman of the Council, and I will succeed you as the head of the Robotics Institute. Are you sure it will work out that way? Absolutely. Just send the message and make it strong, and I will guarantee all the rest. Victory for the Spacers and ourselves, defeat for Earth and the settlers. Chapter 14. The Duel. 57. Gladia watched Aurora's globe on the screen. Its cloud cover seemed caught in mid-swirl along the thick crescent that was shining in the light of its sun. Surely we're not that close, she said. DG smiled. By no means. We're seeing it through a rather good lens. It's still several days away, counting the spiral approach. If we ever get an anti-gravitic drive, which the physicists keep dreaming about, but seem helpless to bring about, spaceflight will become really simple and fast. As it is, our jumps can only deliver us safely to a rather goodish distance from a planetary mass. It's odd, said Gladia thoughtfully. What is, madam? When we went to Solaria, I thought to myself, I'm going home. But when I landed, I found that I wasn't home at all. Now we're going to Aurora, and I thought to myself, now I'm going home, and yet that world down there isn't home either. Where is home, then, madam? I'm beginning to wonder. But why do you persist in calling me madam? DG looked surprised. Do you prefer Lady Gladia, Lady Gladia? That's also mock respect. Do you feel that way about me? Mock respect? Certainly not, but how else does a settler address a spacer? I'm trying to be polite and to conform to your customs, to do what makes you feel comfortable. But it doesn't make me feel comfortable. Just call me Gladia. I've suggested it before. After all, I call you DG. And that suits me fine, although in front of my officers and men I would prefer to have you address me as Captain, and I will call you Madam. Discipline must be maintained. Yes, of course, said Gladia absently, staring at Aurora again. I have no home. She whirled toward DG. Is it possible that you might take me to Earth, DG? Possible, said DG, smiling. You might not want to go, Gladia. I think I want to go, said Gladia, unless I lose my courage. Infection does exist, said DG, and that's what spacers fear, isn't it? Too much, perhaps. After all, I know your ancestor and wasn't infected. I have been on this ship and have survived. Look, you're near me right now. I was even on your world with thousands crowding near me. I think I've worked up a certain amount of resistance. I must tell you, Gladia, that Earth is 1,000 times as crowded as Bailey World. Even so, said Gladia, her voice warming, I've changed my mind completely about many things. I've told you there was nothing left to live for after 23 decades, and it turns out there is. What happened to me on Bailey World, the talk I gave, the way it moved people, was something new, something I'd never imagined. It was like being born all over, starting again at the first decade. It seems to me now that even if Earth kills me, it would be worth it, for I would die young and trying and fighting death, not old and weary and welcoming it. Well, said DG, lifting his arms in a mock heroic gesture, you sound like a hyperwave historical. Have you ever watched them on Aurora? Of course, they're very popular. Are you rehearsing for one, Gladia, or do you really mean what you say? Gladia laughed. I suppose I do sound rather silly, DG. But the funny thing is that I do mean it, if I don't lose my courage. In that case, we'll do it. We'll go to Earth. I don't think they'll consider you worth a war, especially if you report fully on events on Solaria, as they want you to, and if you give your word of honor as a spacer woman, if you do things like that, to return. But I won't. But you may want to someday. And now, my lady, I mean Gladia, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, but I'm always tempted to spend too much time at it, and I am certain I am needed in the control room. If I'm not, and they can do without me, then I'd rather they didn't find out. 58. Was that your doing, friend Giskard? To what is it that you refer, friend Daneel? Lady Gladia is anxious to go to Earth, and even perhaps not to return. That is a desire so antithetical to what a spacer such as she would want, that I cannot help but suspect that you did something to her mind to make her feel so. Giskard said, I did not touch her. It is difficult enough to tamper with any human being within the cage of the 3 laws. To tamper with the mind of the particular individual for whose safety one is directly responsible is more difficult still. Then why does she wish to go to Earth? Her experiences on Bailey World have changed her point of view considerably. She has a mission, that of ensuring peace in the galaxy, and burns to work at it. In that case, friend Giskard, would it not be better to do what you can to persuade the captain, in your own fashion, to go to Earth directly? That would create difficulties. The Auroran authorities are so insistent on Lady Gladia being returned to Aurora that it would be better to do so, at least temporarily. Yet it could be dangerous to do so, said Daneel. Then you still think, friend Daneel, that it is I whom they want to retain because they have learned of my abilities? I see no other reason for their insistence on Lady Gladia's return. Giskard said, Thinking like a man has its pitfalls, I see. It becomes possible to suppose difficulties that cannot exist. Even if someone on Aurora were to suspect the existence of my abilities, it is with those abilities that I would remove the suspicion. There is nothing to fear, friend Daneel. And Daneel said reluctantly, As you say, friend Giskard. 59. Gladia looked about thoughtfully, sending off the robots with a careless motion of her hand. She looked at her hand as she did so, almost as though she were seeing it for the first time. It had been the hand with which she had shaken the hand of each of the crewmen of the ship before getting into the small tender that took her and DG down to Aurora. When she promised to return, they had cheered her, and Nis had bawled out, "We won't leave without you, my lady." The cheering had pleased her enormously. Her robots served her endlessly, loyally, patiently, but they never cheered her. DG, watching her curiously, said, "Surely you are at home now, Gladia." "I am in my establishment," she said in a low voice. "It has been my establishment since Dr. Fastolf assigned it to me 20 decades ago, and yet it feels strange to me."
"It is strange to me," said D.G. "I'd feel rather lost staying here alone."
He looked about with a half-smile at the ornate furnishings and the elaborately decorated walls. "You won't be alone, D.G.," said Gladia. "My household robots will be with you, and they have full instructions. They will devote themselves to your comfort."
"Will they understand my settler accent?"
"If they fail to understand, they will ask you to repeat, and you must then speak slowly and make gestures. They will prepare food for you, show you how to use the facilities in the guest rooms, and they will also keep a sharp eye on you to make sure that you do not act in an unguestly manner. They will stop you if necessary, but they will do so without hurting you."
"I trust they won't consider me non-human."
"As the overseer did? No. I guarantee you that, D.G., though your beard and accent may confuse them to the point where they will be a second or two slow in reacting."
"And I suppose they'll protect me against intruders?"
"They will, but there won't be any intruders."
"The council may want to come and get me."
"Then they will send robots, and mine will turn them away."
"What if their robots overpower your robots?"
"That can't happen, D.G. An establishment is inviolate."
"Come on, Gladia, do you mean that nobody has ever—"
"Nobody has ever," she replied at once. "You just stay here comfortably, and my robots will take care of all your needs. If you want to get in touch with your ship, with Bailey World, even with the Auroran Council, they will know exactly what to do. You won't have to lift a finger." D.G. sank down into the nearest chair, spread himself out over it, and sighed deeply.
"How wise we are to allow no robots on the settler world. Do you know how long it would take to corrupt me into idleness and sloth if I stayed in this kind of society? 5 minutes at most. In fact, I'm corrupted already."
He yawned and stretched luxuriously.
"Would they mind if I sleep?"
"Of course they wouldn't. If you do, the robots will see to it that your surroundings are kept quiet and dark." Then D.G. straightened suddenly.
"What if you don't come back?"
"Why shouldn't I come back?"
"The council seems to want you rather urgently."
"They can't hold me. I'm a free Auroran citizen, and I go where I please."
"There are always emergencies when a government wishes to manufacture one, and in an emergency rules can always be broken."
"Nonsense. Giskard, am I going to be kept there?" Giskard said, "Madam Gladia, you will not be kept there. The captain need not be concerned with respect to that." "There you are, D.G., and your ancestor, the last time he saw me, told me I was always to trust Giskard."
"Good. Excellent. Just the same, the reason I came down with you, Gladia, was to make sure I get you back. Remember that, and tell it to your Dr. Amadero if you have to. If they try to keep you against your will, they will have to try to keep me as well, and my ship, which is in orbit, is fully capable of reacting to that."
"No, please," said Gladia, disturbed. "Don't think of doing that. Aurora has ships as well, and I'm sure yours is under observation."
"There's a difference, though, Gladia. I doubt very much that Aurora would want to go to war over you. Bailey World, on the other hand, would be quite prepared to."
"Surely not. I wouldn't want them to go to war on my account. And why should they, anyway? Because I was a friend of your ancestor?"
"Not exactly. I don't think anyone can quite believe that you were that friend. Maybe your great-grandmother, not you. Even I don't believe it was you."
"You know it was I."
"Intellectually, yes. Emotionally, I find it impossible. That was 20 decades ago.
Gladia shook her head. "You have the short-lived view."
"Maybe we all do, but it doesn't matter. What makes you important to Bailey World is the speech you gave. You're a heroine, and they will decide you must be presented at Earth. Nothing will be allowed to prevent that."
Gladia said, a trifle alarmed, "Presented at Earth? With full ceremony?"
"The fullest."
"Why should that be thought so important as to be worth a war?"
"I'm not sure I can explain that to a spacer. Earth is a special world. Earth is a holy world. It's the only real world. It's where human beings came into being, and it's the only world in which they evolved and developed and lived against a full background of life. We have trees on Bailey World and insects,
But on Earth they have a wild riot of trees and insects that none of us ever see except on Earth. Our worlds are imitations, pale imitations. They don't exist and can't exist except for the intellectual, cultural, and spiritual strength they draw from Earth. Gladia said, "This is quite opposed to the opinion of Earth held by spacers. When we refer to Earth, which we seldom do, it is as a world that is barbarous and in decay." DG flushed. "That is why the spacer worlds have been growing steadily weaker. As I said before, you are like plants that have pulled themselves loose from their roots, like animals that have cut out their hearts." Gladia said, "Well, I look forward to seeing Earth for myself, but I will have to go now. Please treat this as your own establishment till I return." She walked briskly toward the door, stopped, then turned. "There are no alcoholic drinks in this establishment, or anywhere on Aurora. No tobacco, no alkaloidal stimulants, nothing of any artificial kinds of whatever you may be used to." DG grinned sourly. "We settlers are aware of that. Very puritanical, you people." "Not puritanical at all," said Gladia, frowning. 30 to 40 decades of life must be paid for, and that's one of the ways. You don't suppose we do it by magic, do you?" "Well, I'll make do on healthful fruit juices and sanitized near coffee, and I'll smell flowers." "You'll find an ample supply of such things," said Gladia coldly, "and when you get back to your ship, I'm sure you can compensate for any withdrawal symptoms you will now suffer." "I will suffer only from your withdrawal, my lady," said DG gravely. Gladia found herself forced to smile. "You're an incorrigible liar, my captain. I'll be back. Daneel? Giskard." 60. Gladia sat stiffly in Amadero's office. In many decades she had seen Amadero only in the distance or on a viewing screen, and on such occasions she had made it a practice to turn away. She remembered him only as Fastolf's great enemy, and now that she found herself, for the first time, in the same room with him, in face-to-face confrontation, she had to freeze her face into expressionlessness in order not to allow hate to peek through. Although she and Amadero were the only palpable human beings in the room, there were at least a dozen high officials, the chairman himself among them, who were present by way of sealed-beam holovision. Gladia had recognized the chairman and some of the others, but not all. It was rather a grisly experience. It seemed so like the viewing that was universal of Solaria, and to which she had been so accustomed as a girl, and which she recalled with such distaste. She made an effort to speak clearly, undramatically, and concisely. When asked a question, she was as brief as was consistent with clarity, and as noncommittal as was consistent with courtesy. The chairman listened impassively, and the others took their cue from him. He was clearly elderly. Chairmen always were, somehow, for it was usually late in life that they attained the position. He had a long face, a still thick head of hair, and prominent eyebrows. His voice was mellifluous, but in no way friendly. When Gladia was done, he said, "It is your suggestion, then, that the Solarians had redefined human being in a narrow sense that restricted it to Solarians?" "I do not suggest anything, Mr. Chairman. It is merely that no one has been able to think of another explanation that would account for the events." "Are you aware, Madame Gladia, that in all the history of robotic science, no robot has ever been designed with a narrow definition of human being?" "I am not a roboticist, Mr. Chairman, and I know nothing of the mathematics of positronic pathways. Since you say it has never been done, I of course accept that. I cannot say of my own knowledge, however, whether the fact that it has never been done means that it can never be done in the future." Her eyes had never looked as wide and innocent as they did now, and the chairman flushed and said, "It is not theoretically impossible to narrow the definition, but it is unthinkable." Gladia said, with a downcast glance at her hands, which were loosely clasped in her lap, "People can think such peculiar things sometimes." The chairman changed the subject and said, "An Auroran ship was destroyed. How do you account for that?" "I was not present at the site of the incident, Mr. Chairman. I have no idea what happened, so I can't account for it." "You were on Solaria, and you were born on the planet. Given your recent experience and early background, what would you say happened?" The chairman showed signs of a badly strained patience. "If I must guess," said Gladia, "I should say that our warship was exploded by the use of a portable nuclear intensifier similar to the one that was almost used on the settler ship." "Does it not strike you, however, that the two cases are different? In one, a settler ship invaded Solaria to confiscate Solarian robots. In the other, an Auroran vessel came to Solaria to help protect the sister planet." "I can only suppose, Mr. Chairman, that the overseers, the humanoid robots left to guard the planet, were insufficiently well instructed to know the difference." The chairman looked offended. "It is inconceivable that they would not be instructed in the difference between settlers and fellow spacers." "If you say so, Mr. Chairman. Nevertheless, if the only definition of a human being is someone with the physical appearance of a human being, together with the ability to speak in Solarian fashion, as it seemed to us who were on the spot that it must be, then Aurorans who do not speak in Solarian fashion might not fall under the heading of human beings where the overseers were concerned." "Then you are saying that the Solarians defined their fellow spacers as non-human and subjected them to destruction?" "I present it merely as a possibility, because I can't think of any other way to explain the destruction of an Auroran warship. More experienced people may be able to present alternate explanations, to be sure." Again that innocent, almost blank look. The chairman said, "Are you planning to return to Solaria, Madam Gladia?" "No, Mr. Chairman, I have no such plan." "Have you been requested to do so by your settler friend in order to clear the planet of its overseers?" Slowly Gladia shook her head. "I have not been requested to do this. Had I been, I would have refused. Nor did I go to Solaria to begin with, for any reason but that of fulfilling my duty to Aurora. I was requested to go to Solaria by Dr. Levular Mandamus of the Robotics Institute, working under Dr. Keldon Amadiro. I was requested to go so that, on my return, I might report on events, as I have just done. The request had, to my ears and understanding, the flavor of an order, and I took the order," she glanced briefly in Amadiro's direction, "as coming from Dr. Amadiro himself." Amadiro made no visible response to that. The chairman said, "What are your plans for the future, then?" Gladia waited a heartbeat or two, then decided she might as well confront the situation boldly. "It is my intention, Mr. Chairman," said Gladia, speaking very clearly, "to visit Earth." "Earth? Why should you wish to visit Earth?" "It may be important, Mr. Chairman, for Auroran authorities to know what is taking place on Earth. Since I have been invited by the Bailey World authorities to visit Earth, and since Captain Bailey stands ready to take me there, it would be an opportunity to bring back a report on events, as I have now reported on events taking place on Solaria and on Bailey World." Well then, thought Gladia, will he violate custom and, in effect, imprison her on Aurora? If so, there had to be ways of challenging the decision. Gladia felt her tension rising, and she cast a quick glance in the direction of Daneel, who of course seemed totally impassive. However, the chairman, looking sour, said, "In that respect, Madam Gladia, you have the right of an Auroran to do as you wish, but it will be on your own responsibility. No one is requesting this of you, as some requested, according to you, your visit to Solaria. For that reason I must warn you that Aurora will not feel bound to help you in case of any misadventure." "I understand that, sir." The chairman said brusquely, "There will be much to discuss on the matter later on, Amadiro. I will be in touch with you." The images blanked out, and Gladia found herself and her robot suddenly alone with Amadiro and his robot. 61. Gladia rose and said stiffly, carefully refusing to look directly at Amadiro as she did so, "The meeting, I presume, is over, so I will now leave." "Yes, of course, but I have a question or two which I hope you don't mind my asking." His tall figure seemed overwhelming as he rose, and he smiled and addressed her in all courtesy, as though friendliness were long established between them. "Let me escort you, Lady Gladia. So, you are going to Earth?" "Yes. The chairman raised no objections, and an Auroran citizen may freely travel through the galaxy in time of peace. And, pardon me, but my robots, and yours if necessary, will be sufficient escort." "As you say, my lady." A robot held the door open for them. "I assume you will take robots with you when you go to Earth?" "There's no question as to that." "Which robots, madam, if I may ask?" "These two." The 2 robots I have with me." Her shoes made a firm clicking sound as she walked rapidly along the corridor, her back to Amadiro, making no effort to see to it that he heard her. "Is that wise, my lady? They are advanced robots, unusual products of the great Dr. Fastolf. You will be surrounded by barbarian Earthmen who may covet them." "Should they covet them, they nevertheless wouldn't get them." "Don't underestimate the danger, nor overestimate robotic protection. You will be in one of their cities, surrounded by tens of millions of these Earthmen, and robots may not harm human beings. Indeed, the more advanced a robot, the more sensitive it is to the nuances of the 3 laws, and the less likely it is to take any action that will harm a human being in any way. Isn't that so, Daneel?" "Yes, Dr. Amadiro," said Daneel. "Giskard, I imagine, agrees with you." "I do," said Giskard. "You see, my lady, here on Aurora, in a non-violent society, your robots can protect you against others. On Earth, mad, decadent, barbarous, there will be no way 2 robots can protect you or themselves. We would not want you to be deprived, nor, to place it on a more selfish basis, would we of the Institute and the government care to see advanced robots in the hands of the barbarians. Would it not be better to take robots of a more ordinary type that the Earth people would ignore? You can take any number in that case, 12 if you wish." Gladia said, "Dr. Amadiro, I took these 2 robots on a settler ship and visited a settler world. No one made a move to appropriate them." "The settlers don't use robots and claim to disapprove of them. On Earth itself they still use robots." Daneel said, "If I may interpose, Dr. Amadiro, it is my understanding that robots are being phased out on Earth. There are very few in the cities. Almost all robots on Earth are now used in agricultural or mining operations. For the rest, non-robotic automation is the norm." Amadiro looked at Daneel briefly, then said to Gladia, "Your robot is probably right, and I suppose there would be no harm in taking Daneel. He could well pass as human, for that matter. Giskard, however, may well be left in your establishment. He might arouse the acquisitive instincts of an acquisitive society, even if it is true that they are trying to free themselves of robots." Gladia said, "Neither will be left, sir. They will come with me. I am the sole judge of which portions of my property may come with me and which may not." "Of course." Amadiro smiled in his most amiable fashion. "No one disputes that. Would you wait here?" Another door opened, showing a room that was most comfortably furnished. It was without windows, but was illuminated by soft light, and suffused with even softer music. Gladia stopped at the threshold and said sharply, "Why?" "A member of the Institute wishes to see you and speak to you. It will not take long, but it is necessary. Once that is done, you are free to go. You will not even be plagued by my presence from this moment on. Please." There was a touch of hidden steel in the last word. Gladia reached out her arms for Daneel and Giskard. "We enter together." Amadiro laughed genially. "Do you think I'm trying to separate you from your robots? Do you think they would allow that? You have been too long with settlers, my dear." Gladia looked at the closed door and said between her teeth, "I dislike that man intensely, and most intensely when he smiles and tries to be soothing." She stretched, her elbow joints cracking slightly. "In any case, I'm tired. If someone comes with further questions about Solaria and Bailey World, they are going to get short answers, I tell you." She sat down on a couch that gave softly under her weight. She slipped her shoes off and lifted her feet to the couch. She smiled sleepily, took a deep breath as she sank to one side, and, with her head turned away from the room, was instantly and deeply asleep. 62. "It is well she was naturally sleepy," said Giskard. "I was able to deepen it without any hint of damage to her at all. I would not want Lady Gladia to hear what is likely to come." "What is likely to come, friend Giskard?" asked Daneel. "What is to come is the result, I think, of my being wrong, friend Daneel, and of your being right. I should have taken your excellent mind more seriously." "It is you, then, they want to keep on Aurora?" "Yes, and in urgently calling for Lady Gladia's return, they were calling for mine. You heard Dr. Amadero ask for us to be left behind, at first both of us, and then myself alone. Might it be that his words have but the surface meaning, that he feels it dangerous to lose an advanced robot to the Earthmen? There was an underlying current of anxiety, friend Daneel, that I judged to be far too strong to match his words. Can you tell whether he knows of your special abilities? I cannot tell directly, since I cannot read thoughts themselves. Nevertheless, twice in the course of the interview with the council members, there was a sudden sharp rise in the level of emotional intensity in Dr. Amadero's mind. Extraordinarily sharp rises. I cannot describe it in words, but it would be analogous perhaps to watching a scene in black and white, and having it splash suddenly and briefly into intense color. When did this happen, friend Giskard? The second time was when Lady Gladia mentioned she would be going to Earth. That created no visible stir among the council members. What were their minds like? I could not tell. They were present through holovision, and such images are not accompanied by any mental sensations that I can detect. We may conclude, then, that whether the council is or is not disturbed by Lady Gladia's projected trip to Earth, Dr. Amadero, at least, is disturbed. It was not simple disturbance. Dr. Amadero seemed anxious in the highest degree, as we would expect, for instance, if he indeed had a project in hand, as we suspect, for the destruction of Earth, and feared its discovery. What is more, at Lady Gladia's mention of this intention of hers, friend Daneel, Dr. Amadero glanced briefly at me, the only moment in all the session that he did. The flash of emotional intensity coincided with that glance. I think it was the thought of my going to Earth that made him anxious, as we might expect, if he felt that I, with my special powers, would be a particular danger to his plans. His actions might also be taken, friend Giskard, as fitting his expressed fear that the Earthmen would try to appropriate you as an advanced robot, and that this would be bad for Aurora. The chance of that happening, friend Daneel, and the extent of damage that might do the spacer community, is too small to account for his level of anxiety. What harm could I do Aurora if I were in Earth's possession, if I were simply the Giskard I am taken to be? You conclude, then, that Dr. Amadero knows you are not simply the Giskard you are taken to be. I am not sure. He may simply suspect it. If he knew what I was, would he not make every effort to avoid making his plans in my presence? It may simply be his misfortune that Lady Gladia will not be separated from us. He cannot insist on your not being present, friend Giskard, without giving away his knowledge to you. Daneel paused, then said, It is a great advantage you have, friend Giskard, being able to weigh the emotional contents of minds. But you said that Dr. Amadero's flash of emotion at the trip to Earth was the second. What was the first? The first came with a mention of the nuclear intensifier, and that, too, seemed significant. The concept of a nuclear intensifier is well known on Aurora. They don't have a portable device, not one light enough and efficient enough to be practical on shipboard, but it's not something that would break upon him like a thunderbolt. Why, then, so much anxiety? Possibly, said Daneel, because an intensifier of that sort has something to do with his plans on Earth. Possibly. And it was at this point that the door opened, a person entered, and a voice said, Well, Giskard. 63. Giskard looked at the newcomer and said in a calm voice, Madam Vasilia. You remember me, then? Said Vasilia, smiling warmly. Yes, madam. You are a well-known roboticist, and your face is on the hyperwave news now and then. Come, Giskard, I do not mean that you recognize me. Anyone can do that. I mean you remember me. You once called me Miss Vasilia. I remember that too, madam. It was a long time ago. Vasilia closed the door behind her and sat down in one of the chairs. She turned her face toward the other robot. And you are Daneel, of course. Daneel said, Yes, madam. To make use of the distinction you have just advanced, I both remember you, for I was with plainclothesman Elijah Bailey once when he interviewed you, and I recognize you too. Vasilia said sharply, You are not to refer to that Earthman again. I recognize you as well, Daneel. You are as famous as I am in your own way. You are both famous, for you are the greatest creations of the late Dr. Hans Fastolf." "Of your father, madam," said Giskard. "You know very well, Giskard, that I attach no importance to that purely genetic relationship. You are not to refer to him in that manner again." "I will not, madam." "And this one?" She looked casually at the sleeping figure on the couch. "Since you two are here, I can reasonably assume that the sleeping beauty is the Solarian woman." Giskard said, "She is Lady Gladia, and I am her property. Do you want her awake, madam?" "We will merely disturb her, Giskard. If you and I talk of old times, let her sleep." "Yes, madam." Vasilia said to Daneel, "Perhaps the discussion that Giskard and I will have will be of no interest to you either, Daneel. Would you wait outside?" Daneel said, "I fear I cannot leave, my lady. My task is to guard Lady Gladia." "I don't think she needs much guarding from me. You'll notice I do not have any of my robots with me, so Giskard alone will be ample protection for your Solarian lady." Daneel said, "You have no robots in the room, madam, but I saw 4 robots just outside in the corridor when the door was opened. It will be best if I stay." "Well, I won't try to override your orders. You can stay." "Giskard?" "Yes, madam." "Do you remember when you were first activated?" "Yes, madam." "What do you remember?" "First light, then sound, then a crystallization into the sight of Dr. Fastolf. I could understand galactic standard, and I had a certain amount of innate knowledge built into my positronic brain paths. The 3 laws, of course, a large vocabulary with definitions, robotic duties, social customs. Other things I learned rapidly." "Do you remember your first owner?" "As I said, Dr. Fastolf." "Think again, Giskard. Wasn't it I?" Giskard paused, then said, "Madam, I was assigned the task of guarding you in my capacity as a possession of Dr. Hans Fastolf." "It was a bit more than that, I think. You obeyed only me for 10 years. If you obeyed anyone else, including Dr. Fastolf, it was only incidentally, as a consequence of your robotic duties, and only insofar as it fit your prime function of guarding me. I was assigned to you, it is true, Lady Vasilia, but Dr. Fastolf retained ownership. Once you left his establishment, he resumed full control of me as my owner. He remained my owner, even when he later assigned me to Lady Gladia. He was my only owner for as long as he lived. Upon his death, by his will, ownership of me was transferred to Lady Gladia, and that is how it stands now." "Not so. I asked you if you remembered when you were first activated and what you remembered. What you were when you were first activated is not what you are now." "My memory banks, madam, are now incomparably fuller than they were then, and I have much in the way of experience that I did not have then." Vasilia's voice grew sterner. "I am not talking about memory, nor am I talking about experience. I am talking about capacities. I added to your positronic pathways. I adjusted them. I improved them." "Yes, madam, you did so with Dr. Fastolf's help and approval." "At one time, Giskard, on one occasion, I introduced an improvement, at least an extension, and without Dr. Fastolf's help and approval. Do you remember that?" Giskard was silent for a substantial period of time. Then he said, "I remember one occasion on which I did not witness your consulting him. I assumed that you consulted him at a time when I was not a witness." "If you assumed that, you assumed incorrectly. In fact, since you knew he was off the world at the time, you could not possibly have assumed it. You are being evasive, to use no stronger word." "No, madam. You might have consulted him by hyperwave. I considered that a possibility." Vasilia said, "Nevertheless, that addition was entirely mine. The result was that you became a substantially different robot afterward from what you had been before. The robot you have been ever since. That change has been my design, my creation, and you know that well." Giskard remained silent. "Now, Giskard, by what right was Dr. Fastolf your master at the time you were activated?" She waited, then said sharply, "Answer me, Giskard. That is an order." Giskard said, Since he was designer and supervised the construction, I was his property. And when I, in effect, redesigned and reconstructed you in a very fundamental way, did you not then become my property? Giskard said, I cannot answer that question. It would require the decision of a law court to argue out the specific case. It would depend, perhaps, on the degree to which I was redesigned and reconstructed. Are you aware of the degree to which that took place? Giskard was again silent. This is childish, Giskard, said Vasilia. Am I to be required to nudge you after each question? You are not to make me do that. In this case, at any rate, silence is a sure indication of an affirmative. You know what the change was and how fundamental it was, and you know that I know what it was. You put the Solarian woman to sleep because you did not want her to learn from me what it was. She doesn't know, does she? She does not, madam, said Giskard. And you don't want her to know? I do not, madam, said Giskard. Does Daneel know? He does, madam. Vasilia nodded. I've rather suspected that from his eagerness to stay. Now then, listen to me, Giskard. Suppose that a court of law finds out that before I redesigned you, you were an ordinary robot, and that after I redesigned you, you were a robot who could sense the mindset of an individual human being and adjust it to his liking. Do you think they could possibly fail to consider it a change great enough to warrant the ownership to have passed into my hands? Giskard said, Madam Vasilia, it would not be possible to let this come before a court of law. Under the circumstances, I would surely be declared the property of the state for obvious reasons. I might even be ordered inactivated. Nonsense. Do you take me for a child? With your abilities, you could keep the court from making any such judgment. But that is not the point. I'm not suggesting that we take this to court. I am asking you for your own judgment. Would you not say that I am your rightful owner, and have been since I was a very young woman? Giskard said, Madame Gladia considers herself to be my owner, and until the law speaks to the contrary, she must be considered that. But you know that both she and the law labor under a misapprehension. If you worry about the feelings of your Solarian woman, it would be very easy to adjust her mindset so that she wouldn't mind your no longer being her property. You can even cause her to feel relieved that I will take you off her hands. I will order you to do so as soon as you can bring yourself to admit what you already know, that I am your owner. How long has Daneel known your nature? 4 decades, madam. You can make him forget. For some time now, Dr. Amadero has known, and you can make him forget. There will be only you and I who will know. Daneel said suddenly, Madam Vasilia, since Giskard does not consider himself your property, he can easily make you forget, and you will then be perfectly content with matters as they are. Vasilia turned a cold eye on Daneel. Can he? But you see, it is not for you to decide who it is that Giskard considers his owner. I know that Giskard knows that I am his owner, so that his duty within the 3 laws belongs entirely to me. If he must make someone forget, and can do so without physical harm, it will be necessary for him, in making a choice, to choose anyone but me. He cannot make me forget, or tamper with my mind in any way. I thank you, Daneel, for giving me the occasion of making this quite plain. Daneel said, But Madame Gladia's emotions are so enwrapped in Giskard that for him to force forgetfulness upon her might harm her. Vasilia said, Giskard is the one to decide that. Giskard, you are mine. You know you are mine, and I order you to induce forgetfulness in this man-aping robot who stands beside you, and in the woman who wrongfully treated you as her property. Do it while she is asleep, and there will be no harm done to her of any kind. Daneel said, Friend Giskard, Lady Gladia is your legal owner. If you induce forgetfulness in Lady Vasilia, it will not harm her. But it will, said Vasilia at once. The Solarian woman will not be harmed, for she need only forget that she is under the impression that she is Giskard's owner. I, on the other hand, also know that Giskard has mental powers. Digging that out will be more complex, and Giskard can surely tell by my intense determination to keep that knowledge that he could not help but inflict damage on me in the process of removing it. Daneel said, Friend Giskard. Vasilia said in a voice that was diamond-hard, I order you, Robot Daneel Olivar, to be silent. I am not your owner, but your owner is asleep and does not countermand it, so my order must be obeyed. Daneel fell silent, but his lips trembled as though he were trying to talk, despite the order. Basilia watched that manifestation with an amused smile on her lips. You see, Daneel, you cannot talk. And Daneel said in a hoarse whisper, I can, madam. I find it difficult, but I can, for I find that something takes precedence over your order, which is governed by only the second law. Basilia's eyes opened wide, and she said sharply, Silence, I say. Nothing takes precedence over my order but the first law, and I have already shown that Giskard will do least harm, indeed no harm at all, if he returns to me. He will do harm to me, to whom he is least capable of doing harm, if he follows any other course of action. She pointed her finger at Daneel and said again with a soft hiss, Silence. It was a clear effort for Daneel to make any sound at all. The small pump within him that manipulated the air current that produced the sound made a small humming noise as it labored. Yet, though he spoke in an even lower whisper, he could still be heard. He said, Madam Basilia, there is something that transcends even the first law. Giskard said in a voice equally low but unforced, Friend Daneel, you must not say that. Nothing transcends the first law. Basilia, frowning slightly, showed a spark of interest. Indeed. Daneel, I warn you that if you attempt to progress further in this odd line of argument, you will surely destroy yourself. I have never seen or heard of a robot doing what you are doing, and it would be fascinating to watch your self-destruction. Speak on. With the order given, Daneel's voice returned immediately to normal. I thank you, Madam Basilia. Years ago, I sat at the deathbed of an Earthman to whom you have asked me not to refer. May I now refer to him, or do you know who it is that I speak of? You speak of that policeman, Bailey, said Basilia tonelessly. Yes, madam. He said to me on his deathbed, the work of each individual contributes to a totality, and so becomes an undying part of the totality. The totality of human lives, past and present, and to come, forms a tapestry that has been in existence now for many tens of thousands of years, and has been growing more elaborate and, on the whole, more beautiful in all that time. Even the spacers are an offshoot of the tapestry, and they, too, add to the elaborateness and beauty of the pattern. An individual life is one thread in the tapestry, and what is one thread compared to the whole? Daneel, keep your mind fixed firmly on the tapestry, and do not let the trailing off of a single thread affect you. Mawkish sentimentality, murmured Basilia. Daneel said, I believe partner Elijah was attempting to protect me against the fact of his soon-to-come death. It was his own life he spoke of as but a thread in the tapestry. It was his own life that was the trailing off of a single thread that was not to affect me. His words did protect me in that crisis. No doubt, said Basilia, but get to the point of transcending the first law, for it is that which will now destroy you. Daneel said, For decades I have brooded over plainclothesman Elijah Bailey's statement, and it is quite likely I would have understood it at once if the three laws had not stood in the way. I have been helped in my search by my friend Giskard, who has long felt the three laws to be incomplete. I have been helped also by points Lady Gladia made in a recent speech on a settler world. What's more, this present crisis, Lady Basilia, has served to sharpen my thinking. I am certain now as to the manner in which the three laws are incomplete. A robot who is also a roboticist, said Basilia with a touch of contempt. How are the three laws incomplete, robot? Daneel said, The tapestry of life is more important than a single thread. Apply that not to partner Elijah alone, but generalize it, and we conclude that humanity as a whole is more important than a single human being. You stumble as you say it, robot. You do not believe it. Daneel said, There is a law that is greater than the first law. a robot may not injure humanity, or through inaction allow humanity to come to harm. I think of it now as the Zeroth Law of Robotics. The first law should then be stated, a robot may not injure a human being, or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm, unless this would violate the Zeroth Law of Robotics. Vasilia snorted. And you still stand on your feet, robot? I still stand on my feet, madam. Then I will explain something to you, robot, and we will see if you can survive the explanation. The 3 laws of robotics involve individual human beings and individual robots. You can point to an individual human being or to an individual robot, but what is your humanity but an abstraction? Can you point to humanity? You can injure or fail to injure a specific human being and understand the injury or lack of injury that has taken place. Can you see an injury to humanity? Can you understand it? Can you point to it? Daneel was silent. Vasilia smiled broadly. Answer, robot. Can you see an injury to humanity, and can you point to it? No, madam, I cannot. But I believe such injury can exist, nevertheless, and you see that I still stand on my feet. Then ask Giskard as to whether he will, or can, obey your Zeroth Law of Robotics. Daneel's head turned to Giskard. Friend Giskard? Slowly Giskard said, I cannot accept the Zeroth Law, friend Daneel. You know that I have read widely in human history. In it, I have found great crimes committed by some human beings against each other, and the excuse has always been that the crimes were justified by the needs of the tribe, or of the state, or even of humanity. It is precisely because humanity is an abstraction that it can be called upon so freely to justify anything at all, and your Zeroth Law is therefore unsuitable. Daneel said, But you know, friend Giskard, the fact that a danger to humanity now exists, and that it will surely come to fruition if you become the property of Madame Vasilia. That, at least, is not an abstraction. Giskard said, The danger to which you refer is not something known, but is merely inferred. We cannot build our actions in defiance of the 3 laws on that. Daneel paused, then said in a lower voice, But you hope that your studies of human history will help you develop the laws governing human behavior, that you will learn to predict and guide human history, or at least make a beginning, so that someone someday will learn to predict and guide it. You even call the technique psychohistory. In this, are you not dealing with the human tapestry? Are you not trying to work with humanity as a generalized whole, rather than with collections of individual human beings? Yes, friend Daneel, but it is thus far no more than a hope, and I cannot base my actions upon a mere hope, nor can I modify the 3 laws in accordance with it. To that Daneel did not respond. Vasilia said, Well, robot, all your attempts have come to nothing, and yet you stand on your feet. You are strangely stubborn, and a robot such as yourself that can denounce the 3 laws and still remain functional is a clear danger to every and any individual human being. For that reason, I believe you should be dismantled without delay. The case is too dangerous to await the slow majesty of the law, especially since you are, after all, a robot, and not the human being you attempt to resemble. Daneel said, Surely, my lady, it is not fitting for you to reach such a decision on your own. I have reached it, nevertheless, and if there are legal repercussions hereafter, I shall deal with them. You will be depriving Lady Gladia of a second robot, and one to which you make no claim. She and Fastolf between them have deprived me of my robot, Giskard, for more than 20 decades, and I do not believe this ever distressed either of them for a moment. It will not now distress me to deprive her. She has dozens of other robots, and there are many here at the Institute who will faithfully see to her safety until she can return to her own. Daneel said, Friend Giskard, if you will wake Lady Gladia, it may be that she may persuade Lady Vasilia. Vasilia, looking at Giskard, frowned and said sharply, No, Giskard. Let the woman sleep. Giskard, who had stirred at Daneel's words, subsided. Vasilia snapped the finger and thumb of her right hand 3 times, and the door at once opened and 4 robots filed in. "You were right, Daneel. There are 4 robots. They will dismantle you, and you are ordered not to resist. Thereafter, Giskard and I will deal with all remaining matters." She looked over her shoulder at the entering robots. "Close the door behind you. Now, quickly and efficiently dismantle this robot." And she pointed at Daneel. The robots looked at Daneel and for a few seconds did not move. Vasilia said impatiently, "I've told you he is a robot, and you must disregard his human appearance. Daneel, tell them you are a robot." "I am a robot," said Daneel, "and I will not resist." Vasilia stepped to one side, and the 4 robots advanced. Daneel's arms remained at his side. He turned to look at the sleeping Gladia one last time, and then he faced the robots. Vasilia smiled and said, "This should be interesting." The robots paused. Vasilia said, "Get on with it." They did not move, and Vasilia turned to stare in amazement at Giskard. She did not complete the movement. Her muscles loosened, and she crumpled. Giskard caught her and seated her with her back against the wall. He said in a muffled voice, "I need a few moments, and then we will leave." Those moments passed. Vasilia's eyes remained glazed and unfocused. Her robots remained motionless. Daneel had moved to Gladia in a single stride. Giskard looked up and said to Vasilia's robots, "Guard your lady. Allow no one to enter until she wakes. She will waken peacefully." Even as he spoke, Gladia stirred, and Daneel helped her to her feet. She said, wondering, "Who is this woman? Whose robot? How did she—" Giskard spoke firmly, but there was a weariness in his voice. "Lady Gladia, later. I will explain. For now, we must hasten." And they left. Part 5. Earth. Chapter 15. The Holy World. 64. Amadiro bit his lower lip, and his eyes flicked in the direction of Mandamus, who seemed lost in thought. Amadiro said defensively, "She insisted on it. She told me that only she could handle this Giskard, that only she could exert a sufficiently strong influence over him and prevent him from using these mental powers of his." "You never said anything of this to me, Dr. Amadiro." "I wasn't sure what there was to tell, young man. I wasn't sure she was correct." "Are you sure now?" "Completely. She remembers nothing of what went on." "So that we know nothing of what went on." Amadiro nodded. "Exactly. And she remembers nothing of what she had told me earlier." "And she's not acting?" "I saw to it that she had an emergency electroencephalogram. There have been distinct changes from the earlier records." "Is there a chance she will recover her memory with time?" Amadiro shook his head bitterly. "Who can tell? But I doubt it." Mandamus, eyes still downcast and full of thought, said, "Does it matter, then? We can take her account of Giskard as true, and we know that he has the power to affect minds. That knowledge is crucial, and it is now ours. In fact, it is well that our roboticist colleague has failed. If Vasilia had gained control of that robot, how long do you suppose it would have been before you, too, would have been under her control? And I as well, assuming she would think I was worth controlling." Amadiro nodded. "I suppose she might have had something like that in mind. Right now, though, it's hard to tell what she has in mind. She seems, superficially at least, undamaged except for the specific loss of memory. She apparently remembers everything else. But who knows how this will affect her deeper thought processes and her skill as a roboticist. That Giskard could do this to someone as skilled as she makes him an incredibly dangerous phenomenon. Does it occur to you, Dr. Amadiro, that the settlers may be right in their distrust of robots?" "It almost does, Mandamus." Mandamus rubbed his hands together. "I assume, from your depressed attitude, that this whole business was not uncovered before they had time to leave Aurora." "You assume correctly. That settler captain has the Solarian woman and both of her robots on his ship, and is heading toward Earth." "And where does that leave us now?" Slowly, Amadiro said, "By no means defeated, it seems to me. If we complete our project, we have won, Giskard or no Giskard. And we can complete it. Whatever Giskard can do with and to emotion, he can't read thoughts. He might be able to tell when a wash of emotion crosses a human mind, or even distinguish one emotion from another, or change one to another, or induce sleep or amnesia, dull-edged things like that. He cannot be sharp, however. He cannot make out actual words or ideas. Are you sure of that? So said Vasilia. She may not have known what she was talking about. She did not, after all, manage to control the robot, as she said she was sure of doing. That's not much of a testimonial to her accuracy of understanding. Yet I believe her in this. To actually be able to read thoughts would demand so much complexity in the positronic pathway pattern that it is totally unlikely that a child could have inserted it into the robot over 20 decades ago. It is actually far beyond even the present-day state-of-the-art, Mandamus. Surely you must agree. I would certainly think it was. And they're going to Earth? I'm sure of it. Would this woman, brought up as she was, actually go to Earth? She has no choice if Giskard controls her. And why should Giskard want her to go to Earth? Can he know about our project? You seem to think he doesn't. It is possible he doesn't. His motivation for going to Earth might be nothing more than to place himself and the Solarian woman beyond our reach. I shouldn't think he'd fear us if he could handle Vasilia. A long-range weapon, said Amadiro icily, could bring him down. His own abilities must have a limited range. They can be based on nothing other than the electromagnetic field, and he must be subject to the inverse square law. So we get out of range as the intensity of his powers weaken, but he will then find that he is not out of range of our weapons. Mandamus frowned and looked uneasy. You seem to have an unspacer liking for violence, Dr. Amadiro. In a case like this, though, I suppose force would be permissible. A case like this? A robot capable of harming human beings? I should think so. We'll have to find a pretext for sending a good ship in pursuit. It wouldn't be wise to explain the actual situation. No, said Mandamus emphatically. Think of how many would wish to have personal control of such a robot. Which we can't allow, and which is another reason why I would look upon destruction of the robot as the safer and preferable course of action. You may be right, said Mandamus reluctantly, but I don't think it wise to count on this destruction only. I must go to Earth, now. The project must be hastened to its conclusion, even if we don't dot every I and cross every T. Once it is done, then it is done. Even a mind-handling robot under anybody's control will not be able to undo the deed, and if it does anything else, that perhaps will no longer matter. Amadiro said, Don't speak in the singular. I will go as well. You? Earth is a horrible world. I must go, but why you? Because I must go too. I cannot stay here any longer and wonder. You have not waited for this through a long lifetime, as I have, Mandamus. You do not have the accounts to settle that I have. 65. Gladia was in space again, and once again Aurora could be made out as a globe. DG was busy elsewhere, and the entire ship had about it a vague but pervasive air of emergency, as though it were on a battle footing, as though it were being pursued or expected pursuit. Gladia shook her head. She could think clearly, she felt well, but when her mind turned back to that time in the Institute, shortly after Amadiro had left her, a curiously pervasive unreality swept over her. There was a gap in time. One moment she had been sitting on the couch feeling sleepy, the next there were 4 robots and a woman in the room who had not been there before. She had fallen asleep then, but there was no awareness, no memory that she had done so. There was a gap of non-existence. Thinking back, she had recognized the woman after the fact. It was Vasilia Aliena, the daughter whom Gladia had replaced in the affections of Han Fastolf. Gladia had never actually seen Vasilia, though she had viewed her on hyperwave several times. Gladia always thought of her as a distant and inimical other self. There was the vague similarity in appearance that others always commented on, but that Gladia herself insisted she did not see. And there was the odd, antithetical connection with Fastolf. Once they were on the ship, and she was alone with her robots, she asked the inevitable question. What was Vasilia Aliena doing in the room, and why was I permitted to sleep when she had arrived? Daneel said, Madam Gladia, I will answer the question, since it is a matter friend Giskard would find difficult to discuss. Why should he find it difficult, Daneel? Madame Vasilia arrived in the hope that she might persuade Giskard to enter her service. Away from me? Said Gladia in sharp indignation.
She did not entirely like Giskard, but that made no difference. What was hers was hers. And you allowed me to sleep while you two handled the matter by yourselves? We felt, madam, that you needed your sleep badly. Then, too, Madame Vasilia ordered us to allow you to sleep. Finally, it was our opinion that Giskard would not, in any case, join her service. For all these reasons, we did not wake you. Gladia said indignantly, I should hope that Giskard would not for a moment consider leaving me. It would be illegal both by Auroran law and, more important, by the 3 laws of robotics. It would be a good deed to return to Aurora and have her arraigned before the Court of Claims. That would not be advisable at the moment, my lady. What was her excuse for wanting Giskard? Did she have one? When she was a child, Giskard had been assigned to her. Legally? No, madam. Dr. Fastolf merely allowed her the use of it. Then she had no right to Giskard. We pointed that out, madam. Apparently it was a matter of sentimental attachment on the part of Madame Vasilia. Gladia sniffed. Having survived the loss of Giskard since before I came to Aurora, she might well have continued as she was without going to illegal lengths to deprive me of my property. Then, restlessly, I should have been awakened. Daneel said, Madame Vasilia had 4 robots with her. Had you been awake, and had there been harsh words between the 2 of you, there might have been some difficulty in having the robots work out the proper responses. I'd have directed the proper response, I assure you, Daneel. No doubt, madam. So might Madame Vasilia, and she is one of the cleverest roboticists in the galaxy. Gladia shifted her attention to Giskard. And you have nothing to say? Only that it was better as it was, my lady. Gladia looked thoughtfully into those faintly luminous robotic eyes, so different from Daneel's all-but-human ones, and it did seem to her that the incident wasn't very important after all. A small thing. And there were other things with which to be concerned. They were going to Earth. Somehow she did not think of Vasilia again. 66. I am concerned, said Giskard in his whisper of confidentiality, in which sound waves barely trembled the air. The settler ship was receding smoothly from Aurora, and as yet there was no pursuit. The activity on board had settled into routine, and with almost all routines automated, there was quiet, and Gladia slept naturally. I am concerned for Lady Gladia, friend Daneel. Daneel understood the characteristics of Giskard's positronic circuits well enough to need no long explanation. He said, It was necessary, friend Giskard, to adjust Lady Gladia. Had she questioned longer, she might have elicited the fact of your mental activities, and adjustment would then have been more dangerous. Enough harm has already been done because Lady Vasilia discovered the fact. We do not know to whom, and to how many, she may have imparted her knowledge. Nevertheless, said Giskard, I did not wish to make this adjustment. Had Lady Gladia wished to forget, it would have been a simple, no-risk adjustment. She wanted, however, with vigor and anger, to know more of the matter. She regretted not having played a greater role in it. I was forced, therefore, to break binding forces of considerable intensity. Daneel said, Even that was necessary, friend Giskard. Yet the possibility of doing harm was by no means insignificant in such a case. If you think of a binding force as a thin, elastic cord, this is a poor analogy, but I can think of no other, for what I sense in a mind has no analog outside the mind, then the ordinary inhibitions I deal with are so thin and insubstantial that they vanish when I touch them. A strong binding force, on the other hand, snaps and recoils when broken, and the recoil may then break other, totally unrelated binding forces, or, by whipping and coiling about other such forces, strengthen them enormously. In either case, unintended changes can be brought about in a human being's emotions and attitudes, and that would be almost certain to bring about harm. Daneel said, his voice a little louder, Is it your impression you harmed Lady Gladia, friend Giskard? I think not. I was extremely careful. I worked upon the matter during all the time you were talking to her. It was thoughtful of you to bear the brunt of the conversation, and to run the risk of being caught between an inconvenient truth and an untruth.
But despite all my care, friend Daneel, I took a risk, and I am concerned that I was willing to take that risk. It came so close to violating the first law that it required an extraordinary effort on my part to do it. I am sure that I would not have been able to do it. Yes, friend Giskard? Had you not expounded your notion of the Zeroth law? You accept it, then? No, I cannot. Can you? Faced with the possibility of doing harm to an individual human being, or of allowing harm to come to one, could you do the harm or allow the harm in the name of abstract humanity? Think. I am not sure, said Daneel, voice trembling into all but silence. Then, with an effort, I might. The mere concept pushes at me and at you. It helped you decide to take the risk in adjusting Lady Gladia's mind. Yes, it did, agreed Giskard. And the longer we think of the Zeroth law, the more it might help push us. Could it do so, I wonder, in more than a marginal way, however? Might it not only help us take slightly larger risks than we might ordinarily? Yet I am convinced of the validity of the Zeroth law, friend Giskard. So might I be if we could define what we mean by humanity. There was a pause, and Daneel said, Did you not accept the Zeroth law at last, when you stopped Madame Vasilia's robots and erased from her mind the knowledge of your mental powers? Giskard said, No, friend Daneel, not really. I was tempted to accept it, but not really. And yet your actions were dictated by a combination of motives. You told me of your concept of the Zeroth law, and it seemed to have a certain validity about it, but not sufficient to cancel the first law, or even to cancel Madame Vasilia's strong use of the second law in the orders she gave. Then, when you called my attention to the application of the Zeroth law to psychohistory, I could feel the positronomotive force mount higher, and yet it was not quite high enough to supersede the first law, or even the strong second law. Still, murmured Daneel, you struck down Madame Vasilia, friend Giskard. When she ordered the robots to dismantle you, friend Daneel, and showed a clear emotion of pleasure at the prospect, your need, added to what the concept of the Zeroth law had already done, superseded the second law and rivaled the first law. It was the combination of the Zeroth law, psychohistory, my loyalty to Lady Gladia, and your need that dictated my action. My need could scarcely have affected you, friend Giskard. I am only a robot, and though my need could affect my own actions by the third law, they cannot affect yours. You destroyed the Overseer on Solaria without hesitation. You should have watched my destruction without being moved to act. Yes, friend Daneel, and ordinarily it might have been so. However, your mention of the Zeroth law had reduced the first law intensity to an abnormally low value. The necessity of saving you was sufficient to cancel out what remained of it, and I acted as I did. No, friend Giskard. The prospect of injury to a robot should not have affected you at all. It should in no way have contributed to the overcoming of the first law, however weak the first law may have become. It is a strange thing, friend Daneel. I do not know how it came about. Perhaps it was because I have noted that you continue to think more and more like a human being, but... Yes, friend Giskard. At the moment when the robots advanced toward you and Lady Vasilia expressed her savage pleasure, my positronic pathway pattern reformed in an anomalous fashion. For a moment I thought of you as a human being, and I reacted accordingly. That was wrong. I know that. And yet if it were to happen again, I believe the same anomalous change would take place again. Daneel said, It is strange, but hearing you put it so, I find myself feeling you did the proper thing. If the situation were reversed, I almost think that I, too, would do the same. That I would think of you as a human being. Daneel, hesitantly and slowly, put out his hand, and Giskard looked at it uncertainly. Then, very slowly, he put out his own hand. The fingertips almost touched, and then, little by little, each took the other's hand and clasped it, almost as though they were the friends they called each other. 67. Gladia looked about with veiled curiosity. She was in DG's cabin for the first time. It was not noticeably more luxurious than the new cabin that had been designed for her. DG's cabin had a more elaborate viewing panel, to be sure, and it had a complex console of lights and contacts, which, she imagined, served to keep DG in touch with the rest of the ship, even here. She said, "I've seen little of you since leaving Aurora, DG." "I'm flattered that you are aware of that," answered DG, grinning. "And to tell you the truth, Gladia, I have been aware of it as well. With an all-male crew, you do rather stand out." "That's not a very flattering reason for missing me. With an all-human crew, I imagine Daneel and Giskard stand out, too. Have you missed them as much as you have missed me?" DG looked about. "Actually, I miss them so little it is only now that I am aware that they aren't with you. Where are they?" "In my cabin. It seemed silly to drag them about with me inside the confines of the small world of this ship. They seem willing to allow me to be on my own, which surprised me. No," she corrected herself. "Come to think of it, I had to order them rather sharply to stay behind before they would do so." "Isn't that rather strange? Aurorans are never without their robots, I've been given to understand." "What of that? Once, long ago, when I first came to Aurora, I had to learn to suffer the actual presence of human beings, something my Solarian upbringing did not prepare me for. Learning to be without my robots occasionally, when I am among settlers, will probably be a less difficult adjustment for me than the first one was." "Good. Very good. I must admit that I much prefer being with you without the glowing eyes of Giskard fixed on me, and better yet, without Daneel's little smile." "He doesn't smile." "To me, he seems to. A very insinuatingly lecherous, tiny smile." "You're mad. That's totally foreign to Daneel." "You don't watch him the way I do. His presence is very inhibiting. It forces me to behave myself." "Well, I should hope so." "You needn't hope so quite that emphatically. But never mind. Let me apologize for seeing so little of you since leaving Aurora." "That's scarcely necessary." "Since you brought it up, I thought it was. However, let me explain then. We've been on battle footing. We were certain, having left as we did, that Auroran vessels would be in pursuit." "I should think they'd be glad to be rid of a group of settlers." "Of course. But you're not a settler, and it might be you they would want. They were anxious enough to get you back from Bailey World." "They got me back. I reported to them, and that was it." "They wanted nothing more than your report?" "No." Gladia paused, and for a moment frowned as though something was nibbling vaguely at her memory. Whatever it was, it passed, and she said indifferently, "No." DG shrugged. "It doesn't entirely make sense. But they made no attempt to stop us while you and I were on Aurora, nor after that when we boarded the ship and it prepared to leave orbit. I won't quarrel with that. It won't be long now before we make the jump, and after that there should be nothing to worry about." Gladia said, "Why do you have an all-male crew, by the way? Auroran ships always have mixed crews." "So do settler ships, ordinary ones. This is a trader vessel." "What difference does that make?" "Trading involves danger. It's rather a rough-and-ready life. Women on board would create problems." "What nonsense! What problems do I create?" "We won't argue that. Besides, it's traditional. The men wouldn't stand for it." "How do you know?" Gladia laughed. "Have you ever tried it?" "No, but on the other hand, there are no long lines of women clamoring for a berth on my ship." "I'm here. I'm enjoying it." "You're getting special treatment, and but for your service on Solaria, there might well have been much trouble. In fact, there was trouble. Still, never mind." He touched one of the contacts on the console, and a countdown briefly appeared. "We'll be jumping in just about 2 minutes. You've never been on Earth, have you, Gladia?" "No, of course not." "Or seen the sun, not just a sun?" "No, although I have seen it in historical dramas on hypervision, but I imagine what they show in the dramas is not really the sun." "I'm sure it isn't. If you don't mind, we'll dim the cabin lights." The lights dimmed to nearly nothing, and Gladia was aware of the star field on the viewing panel, with the stars brighter and more thickly spread than in Aurora's sky. "Is that a telescopic view?" she asked in a hushed voice. "Slightly. Low power." 15 seconds. He counted backward. There was a shift in the star field, and a bright star was now nearly centered. DG touched another contact and said, "We're well outside the planetary plane. Good. A little risky. We should have been farther from the Auroran star before jumping, but we were in a slight hurry. That's the sun." "That bright star, you mean?" "Yes. What do you think of it?" Gladia said, a little puzzled over what sort of response he expected. "It's bright." He pushed another contact and the view dimmed perceptibly. "Yes, and it won't do your eyes any good if you stare at it. But it's not the brightness that counts. It's just a star in appearance. But think of it. That was the original sun. That was the star whose light shone down on a planet that was the only planet on which human beings existed. It shone down on a planet on which human beings were slowly evolving. It shone down on a planet on which life formed billions of years ago, life that would develop into human beings. There are 300 billion stars in the galaxy, and 100 billion galaxies in the universe, and there is only one of all those stars that presided over the human birth. And that is the star." Gladia was about to say, "Well, some star had to be the star," but she thought better of it. "Very impressive," she said rather weakly. "It's not merely impressive," said DG, his eyes shadowed in the dimness. "There's not a settler in the galaxy who doesn't consider that star his own. The radiation of the stars that shine down on our various home planets is borrowed radiation, rented radiation that we make use of. There, right there, is the real radiation that gave us life. It is that star, and the planet that circles it, Earth, that holds us all together in a tight bond. If we shared nothing else, we would share that light on the screen, and it would be enough. You spacers have forgotten it, and that is why you fall apart from each other, and that is why you will not, in the long run, survive." "There is room for us all, Captain," said Gladia softly. "Yes, of course. I wouldn't do anything to force non-survival on spacers. I just believe that that is what will happen. And it might not happen if spacers would give up their irritating certainty of superiority, their robots, and their self-absorption and long life." "Is that how you see me, DG?" asked Gladia. DG said, "You've had your moments. You've improved, though, I'll give you that." "Thank you," she replied with evident irony. "And though you may find it hard to believe, settlers have their prideful arrogance, too. But you've also improved, and I'll give you that." DG laughed. "With all that I'm giving you, and you're kindly giving me, this is liable to end as a lifelong enmity." "Scarcely," said Gladia, laughing in her turn, and was a little surprised to find that his hand was resting on hers, and a great deal surprised to find that she had not removed her hand. 68. Daneel said, "I am uneasy, friend Giskard, that Madame Gladia is not under our direct observation." "That is not needful on board this ship, friend Daneel. I detect no dangerous emotions, and the captain is with her at the moment. In addition, there would be advantages to her finding it comfortable to be without us, at least on occasion, while we are all on Earth. It is possible that you and I might have to take sudden action without wishing to have her presence and safety a complicating factor." "Then you manipulated her separation from us now?" "Scarcely. Oddly enough, I found a strong tendency in her to imitate the settler way of life in this respect. She has a subdued longing for independence, hampered chiefly by the feeling that she is violating spacerhood in this. That is the best way in which I can describe it. The sensations and emotions are by no means easy to interpret, for I have never encountered it among spacers before. So I merely loosened the spacerhood inhibition by the merest touch." "Will she then no longer be willing to avail herself of our services, friend Giskard? That would disturb me." "It should not. If she should decide she wishes a life free of robots and will be happier so, it is what we will want for her, too. As it is, though, I am sure we will still be useful to her. This ship is a small and specialized habitat in which there is no great danger. She has a further feeling of security in the captain's presence, and that reduces her need for us. On Earth she will still need us, though I trust not in quite so tight a fashion as on Aurora. As I have said, we may need greater flexibility of action once on Earth. Can you yet guess, then, the nature of the crisis facing Earth? Do you know what it is we will have to do? Giskard said, No, friend Daneel, I do not. It is you that have the gift of understanding. Is there something, perhaps, that you see? Daneel remained silent for a while. Then he said, I have had thoughts. What, then, are your thoughts? You told me at the Robotics Institute, you remember, just before Lady Vasilia entered the room in which Madame Gladia lay sleeping, that Dr. Amadero had had 2 intense flashes of anxiety. The first came at the mention of the nuclear intensifier, the second at the statement that Madame Gladia was going to Earth. It seems to me that the two must be connected. I feel that the crisis we are dealing with involves the use of a nuclear intensifier on Earth, that there is time to stop it, and that Dr. Amadero fears that we will do just that if we go to Earth. Your mind tells me you are not satisfied with that thought. Why not, friend Daneel? A nuclear intensifier hastens the fusion processes that happen to be already in progress by means of a stream of W particles. I ask myself, therefore, whether Dr. Amadero plans to use one or more nuclear intensifiers to explode the microfusion reactors that supply Earth with energy. The nuclear explosion so induced would involve destruction through heat and mechanical force, through dust and radioactive products that would be thrown into the atmosphere. Even if this did not suffice to damage Earth mortally, the destruction of Earth's energy supply would surely lead to the long-term collapse of Earth's civilization. Giskard said somberly, That is a horrifying thought. It would seem to be an almost certain answer to the nature of the crisis we seek. Why are you not satisfied, then? I have taken the liberty of using the ship's computer to obtain information concerning the planet Earth. The computer is, as one might expect on a settler ship, rich in such information. It seems that Earth is the one human world that does not use microfusion reactors as a large-scale source of energy. It uses direct solar energy almost entirely, with solar power stations all along the geostationary orbit. There is nothing for a nuclear intensifier to do, except to destroy small devices, spaceships, occasional buildings. The damage might not be negligible, but it would not threaten Earth's existence. It may well be, friend Daneel, that Amadero has some device that would destroy the solar power generators. If so, why did he react to the mention of nuclear intensifiers? There is no way they can serve against solar power generators. Giskard nodded slowly. That is a good point. And to make another, if Dr. Amadero was so horrified at the thought of our going to Earth, why did he make no effort to have us stopped while we were still on Aurora? Or if he only discovered our flight after we had left orbit, why did he not have an Auroran vessel intercept us before we made the jump to Earth? Can it be that we are on a completely wrong track, that somewhere we have made a serious misstep, that... An insistent chain of intermittent chiming sounded throughout the ship, and Daneel said, We have safely made the jump, friend Giskard. I sensed it some minutes ago, but we have not yet reached Earth, and the interception you have just mentioned has, I suspect, now come, so that we are not necessarily on the wrong track. 69. DG was moved to a perverse admiration. When the Aurorans were really moved to action, their technological polish showed. No doubt they had sent one of their newest warships, from which one could at once deduce that whatever had moved them was close to their heart. And that ship had detected the presence of DG's vessel within 15 minutes of its appearance in normal space, and from a sizable distance at that. The Auroran ship was using a limited-focus hyperwave setup. The speaker's head could be seen clearly while it was at the focal spot. All else was a gray haze. If the speaker moved his head a decimeter or so from the focal spot, that went into haze as well. Sound focus was limited as well. The net result was that one saw and heard only the fundamental minimum of the enemy ship. DG already thought of it as the enemy ship, so their privacy was guarded. DG's ship also possessed a limited focus hyperwave, but DG thought enviously it lacked the polish and elegance of the Auroran version. Of course, his own ship was not the best the settlers could do, but even so, the spacers were well ahead technologically. The settlers still had catching up to do. The Auroran head in focus was clear, and so real in appearance that it looked gruesomely disembodied, so that DG would not have been surprised if it had dripped blood. On second glance, however, it could be made out that the neck faded into grayness just after the neckpiece of an undoubtedly well-tailored uniform began to show. The head identified itself, with punctilious courtesy, as Commander Lysiform of the Auroran ship Borealis. DG identified himself in his turn, thrusting his chin forward so as to make certain that his beard was in the sharpest possible focus. It was his opinion that his beard lent him an air of fierceness that could not help but be daunting to a beardless and, he thought, weak-chinned spacer. DG assumed the traditional air of informality that was as irritating to a spacer officer as the latter's traditional arrogance was to a settler. He said, "What is your reason for hailing me, Commander Lysiform?" The Auroran commander had an exaggerated accent, which, it was possible, he thought as formidable as DG considered his beard to be. DG felt himself to be under considerable strain as he tried to penetrate the accent and understand him. "We believe," said Lysiform, "that you have on your ship an Auroran citizen named Gladia Solaria. Is that correct, Captain Bailey?" "Madam Gladia is on board this ship, Commander." "Thank you, Captain. With her, so my information leads me to suppose, are 2 robots of Auroran manufacture, R. Daneel Olivaw and R. Giskard Reventloff. Is that correct?" "That is correct." "In that case, I must inform you that R. Giskard Reventloff is, at present, a dangerous device. Shortly before your ship left Auroran space with him, the said robot, Giskard, badly hurt an Auroran citizen in defiance of the 3 laws. The robot must therefore be dismantled and repaired." "Are you suggesting, Commander, that we on this ship dismantle the robot?" "No, sir, that would not do. Your people, lacking experience with robots, could not dismantle it properly and could not possibly repair it if they did." "We might then simply destroy it." "It is too valuable for that. Captain Bailey, the robot is Aurora's product and Aurora's responsibility. We do not wish to be the cause of damage to the people on your ship and on the planet Earth if you land there. Consequently, we ask that it be delivered to us." DG said, "Commander, I appreciate your concern. However, the robot is the legal property of Lady Gladia, who is with us. It may be that she would not consent to be parted from her robot, and while I don't want to teach you Auroran law, I believe that it would be illegal by that law to force such a parting. While my crew and I do not consider ourselves bound by Auroran law, we would not willingly be a party to helping you perform what your own government might consider to be an illegal act." There was a suggestion of impatience in the commander's voice. "There is no question of illegality, Captain. A life-endangering malfunction in a robot supersedes the ordinary rights of an owner. Nevertheless, if there is any question of that, my ship stands ready to accept Lady Gladia and her robot Daneel, along with Giskard, the robot in question. There will then be no separation of Gladia Solaris and her robotic property until she is brought back to Aurora. The law can then take its proper course." "It is possible, Commander, that Lady Gladia may not wish to leave my ship, or to allow her property to do so." "She has no recourse, Captain. I am legally empowered by my government to demand her, and as an Auroran citizen, she must obey." "But I am not legally bound to deliver up anything on my ship at the demand of a foreign power. What if I choose to disregard your request?" "In that case, Captain, I would have no choice but to consider it an unfriendly act. May I point out that we are within the sphere of the planetary system of which Earth is part. You had no hesitation in teaching me Auroran law. You will forgive me, then, if I point out that your people do not consider it proper to engage in hostilities within the space of this planetary system." "I am aware of that, Commander, and I wish no hostilities, nor do I intend an unfriendly act. However, I am bound for Earth under some urgency. I lose time in this conversation, and I would lose further time if I moved toward you, or waited for you to move toward me, so that we could carry through a physical transfer of Lady Gladia and her robot. I would prefer to continue onward toward Earth, and formally accept all responsibility for the robot Giskard and his behavior until such time as Lady Gladia and her robots return to Aurora." "May I make the suggestion, Captain, that you place the woman and 2 robots in a lifeboat, and detach a member of your crew to pilot it to us. Once the woman and the 2 robots are delivered, we will ourselves escort the lifeboat to the immediate environs of Earth, and we will compensate you adequately for your time and trouble. A trader should not object to that." "I don't, Commander, I don't," said DG, smiling. "Still,
The crewman detailed to pilot the lifeboat might be in great peril, since he would be alone with this dangerous robot. Captain, if the robot's owner is firm in her control, your crewman will be in no greater danger on the lifeboat than he would be on your ship. We will compensate him for the risk. But if the robot can, after all, be controlled by its owner, surely it is not so dangerous that it can't be left with us. The commander frowned. Captain, I trust you are not trying to play games with me. You have my request, and I would like to have it honored at once. I presume I may consult with Lady Gladia. If you do so immediately, please explain to her exactly what is involved. If, meanwhile, you try to proceed toward Earth, I shall consider that an unfriendly act and take the appropriate action. Since, as you claim, your trip toward Earth is urgent, I advise you to proceed forthwith to consult with Gladia Solaria and come to the immediate decision to cooperate with us. You will then not be too long delayed. I will do what I can, said DG, wooden-faced, as he moved out of focus. 70. Well, said DG gravely. Gladia looked distressed. Automatically, she looked toward Daneel and Giskard, but they remained silent and motionless. She said, I don't want to return to Aurora, DG. They can't possibly want to destroy Giskard. He is in perfect working order, I assure you. That's only a subterfuge. They want me for some reason. I suppose there's no way they can be stopped, though, is there? DG said, That's an Auroran warship, and a big one. This is only a trading vessel. We've got energy shields, and they can't just destroy us at a blow, but they can wear us down eventually. Quite soon, in fact, and then destroy us. Is there any way you can strike at them? With my weapons? I'm sorry, Gladia, but their shields can take anything I can throw at them for as long as I can possibly have energy to expend. Besides... Yes? Well, they've just about cornered me. Somehow I thought they would try to intercept me before I jumped, but they knew my destination, and they got here first and waited for me. We're inside the solar system, the planetary system of which Earth is part. We can't fight here. Even if I wanted to, the crew wouldn't obey me. Why not? Call it superstition. The solar system is holy space to us, if you want to describe it in melodramatic terms. We can't desecrate it by fighting. Giskard said suddenly, May I contribute to the discussion, sir? DG frowned and looked toward Gladia. Gladia said, Please, let him. These robots are highly intelligent. I know you find that hard to believe, but I'll listen. I don't have to be influenced. Giskard said, Sir, I am certain that it is me that they want. I cannot allow myself to be the cause of harm to human beings. If you cannot defend yourself and are sure of destruction in a conflict with the other vessel, you have no choice but to give me up. I am sure that if you offer to let them have me, they will not seriously object if you wish to retain Lady Gladia and friend Daneel. It is the only solution. No, said Gladia forcefully. You are mine, and I won't give you up. I'll go with you if the captain decides you must go, and I'll see to it they don't destroy you. May I speak as well? Said Daneel. DG spread his hands in mock despair. Please, everyone speak. Daneel said, If you decide you must give up Giskard, you must understand the consequences. I believe that Giskard thinks that if he is given up, those on the Auroran ship would do him no harm, and that they will even release him. I do not believe this to be so. I believe the Aurorans are serious in thinking him to be dangerous, and they may well have instructions to destroy the lifeboat as it approaches, killing whoever is on board. For what reason would they do that? Asked DG. No Auroran has ever encountered, or even conceived, of what they call a dangerous robot. They would take no chances of taking one on board one of their vessels. I would suggest, Captain, that you retreat. Why not jump again, away from Earth? We are not close enough to any planetary mass to prevent that. Retreat? You mean run away? I can't do that. Well, then you have to give us up, said Gladia with an air of resigned hopelessness. DG said forcefully, I'm not giving you up, and I'm not running away, and I can't fight. Then what's left? Asked Gladia. A fourth alternative, said DG. Gladia, I must ask you to remain here with your robots till I return. 71. DG considered the data. There had been enough time during the conversation for the location of the Auroran vessel to be pinpointed. It was a bit farther from the sun than his own ship was, and that was good. To jump toward the sun at this distance from it would have been risky indeed. To jump sideways would be, so to speak, a piece of cake in comparison. There was the chance of accident through probability deviation, but there was always that. He had himself assured the crew that not a shot would be fired, which would do no good in any case. Clearly they had utter faith in Earth space protecting them as long as they didn't profane its peace by offering violence. It was pure mysticism that D.G. would have scornfully derided had he not shared the conviction himself. He moved back into focus. It had been a fairly long wait, but there had been no signal from the other side. They had shown exemplary patience.
"Captain Bailey here," he said. "I wish to speak to Commander Lithiform."
There was not much of a wait.
"Commander Lithiform here. May I have your answer?"
D.G. said,
"We will deliver the woman and the 2 robots." "Good. A wise decision." "And we will deliver them as quickly as we can." "Again, a wise decision." "Thank you."
D.G. gave the signal and his ship jumped. There was no time, no need to hold one's breath. It was over as soon as it was begun, or at least the time-lapse was insensible. The word came from the pilot.
"New enemy ship position fixed, Captain."
"Good," said D.G.
"You know what to do."
The ship had come out of the jump at high speed relative to the Auroran vessel, and the course correction, not a great deal, it was to be hoped, was being made. Then further acceleration. D.G. moved back into focus.
"We are close, Commander, and on our way to deliver. You may fire if you choose, but our shields are up, and before you can batter them down, we will have reached you in order to make the delivery." "Are you sending a lifeboat?"
The commander moved out of focus. D.G. waited, and the commander was back, his face contorted.
"What is this? Your ship is on a collision course."
"It seems to be, yes," said D.G. "That is the fastest way of making delivery."
"You will destroy your ship."
"And yours, too. Your ship is at least 50 times as expensive as mine, probably more. A poor exchange for Aurora."
"But you are engaging in combat in Earth space, Captain. Your customs do not allow that."
"Ah, you know our customs, and you take advantage of them. But I am not in combat. I have not fired an erg of energy, and I won't. I am merely following a trajectory. That trajectory happens to intersect your position, but since I am sure you will move before the intersection moment arrives, it is clear that I intend no violence."
"Stop. Let's talk about this. I'm tired of talking, Commander. Shall we all say a fond farewell? If you don't move, I will be giving up perhaps 4 decades, with a 3rd and 4th not so good anyway. How many will you be giving up?"
And D.G. moved out of focus and stayed out. A beam of radiation shot out from the Auroran ship, tentative, as though to test whether the other's shields were truly up. They were. Ship shields would hold against electromagnetic radiation and subatomic particles, including even neutrinos, and could withstand the kinetic energy of small masses, dust particles, even meteoric gravel. The shields could not withstand larger kinetic energies, such as that of an entire ship hurtling at it with supermeteoric speed. Even dangerous masses, if not guided, a meteoroid, for instance, could be handled. A vessel's computers would automatically veer the ship out of the way of any oncoming meteoroid that was too large for the shield to handle. That, however, would not work against a ship that could veer as its target veered, and if the settler ship was the smaller of the two, it was also the more maneuverable. There was only one way that the Auroran ship could avoid destruction. D.G. watched the other ship visibly enlarging in his viewing panel, and wondered if Gladia, in her cabin, knew what was going on. She must be aware of the acceleration, despite the hydraulic suspension of her cabin and the compensatory action of the pseudo-gravity field. And then the other ship simply winked out of view, having jumped away, and D.G., with considerable chagrin, realized he was holding his breath and that his heart was racing. Had he had no confidence in the protecting influence of Earth, or in his own sure diagnosis of the situation? D.G. spoke into the transmitter in a voice that, with iron resolution, he forced into coolness. "Well done, men. Correct course and head for Earth.